Welcome back, brothers, to Hammer Lore. Tonight's story, we dive into lore of the War of the False Primarch. Before I get into the madness, be sure to like and comment any videos or topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe from the Emperor. I don't think you guys should support. I've been killing it like usual. Now, let's get into the madness.
The archive had no name. It had been buried beneath terror since before the old wars of apostasy, below the counting vaults of the administratum, below the tithe shrines, below the ossuaries of failed scribes whose bones had been stacked into walls and mortared with prayer wax. It lay where no daylight had ever reached, where the air was older than most planetary dynasties, where every breath tasted of dust, machine oil, and the dry rot of parchment made from human skin. The seal upon its gate was black iron, stamped with the sigil of the Senatorum Imperialis, and banded with chains of sanctified adamantium. Around it stood 12 dead men in red robes, each one nailed upright inside a penitent's frame, each skull bored open and filled with wax. They had been the last clerks to read the catalogue within. Their punishment had not been for treachery, it had been for knowing. A key was brought in a reliquary, carried by 4 hooded adepts. Their hands had been removed at the wrist, so they could not touch what they bore. Behind them came a custodian of the inner vault guard, faceless behind a helm of old gold, his guardian spear lowered not in salute, but in warning. Then came the savant servitor. He had once been a man. His body remembered that truth in the shape of its bones, but nothing else remained. His legs had been replaced by a brass track unit that whispered over the stone. His spine rose from a cage of polished iron. Parchment streamers had been sutured into the flesh of his back, each covered in oath script. His eyes were gone, replaced by black lenses that clicked and widened as they drank in the dark. A vox grill had been riveted where his mouth had been. Below it hung a silver plate engraved with his sentence: "To read is to die." The gate opened without sound. Beyond it waited the archive. Shelves climbed into darkness. Data tombs slept behind crystal panes. Cogitator banks muttered to themselves in Binharic grief. Scroll engines hung from the ceiling like flayed beasts. The floor was carved with warning litanies, each letter filled with powdered bone. At the far end of the vault stood the thing they had come for: a data sarcophagus of black iron. It was tall as a dreadnought sarcophagus, and twice as broad, built like a coffin for a god. Its surface was clotted with purity seals, sensor locks, kill runes, and inquisitorial brands. Red wax had run over it in frozen streams. Bronze cherubs without wings hung dead from its corners, their needle fingers still plugged into ports along its sides. Across its face, in high Gothic severe enough to feel like accusation, were the words the savant servitor had been created to speak. 860th year of the 33rd millennium. Traitoris perdita. Segmentum pacificus. The custodian looked upon the words and did not move. The hooded adepts began to tremble. The savant servitor rolled forward. Its iron fingers unfolded from beneath its ribcage and pressed into the sarcophagus locks. Needles pierced the stumps of its remaining nerves. Ancient recognition engines woke. Somewhere inside the coffin, something began to turn. The vault lights dimmed. The servitor convulsed as the first record entered him. His vox grill clicked. Static bled out. Then came a voice like dry bones dragged across stone. "In the name of the master of mankind, by decree of the high lords of terror, by sanction of sealed conclave and blooded writ, this record is forbidden to all save those already condemned by knowledge. Let it be known that what follows is not confession. It is not history. It is cauterization." The machines around him answered with a low, mourning hum. For 80 years, the segmentum pacificus burned beneath a lie. No hololith rose. The archive did not dare display what had been seen. Instead, the sarcophagus fed the dead facts into the servitor's ruined mind, and he spoke them into the dark. Worlds had gone silent first. Tithe ships had arrived at agrispheres, and found their orbital docks torn open, their administratum prefects hanged from harvest gantries by their own intestines, their granaries emptied not by famine, but by rebellion. Shrine worlds had ceased forwarding pilgrims. Forge moons had delayed weapon shipments, then falsified their ledgers, then sent macro shells engraved with prayers to another master. Astropathic choirs began to sing in voices not their own. Entire choirs were found with their eyes boiled white in their skulls, still smiling, still whispering that a son had returned. The segmentum did not rebel all at once. It rotted by degrees. An oath changed here. A banner turned there. A governor forgot to kneel before the Aquila and knelt before another sigil, one described in the archive only as a crowned wound of light. Penal legions deserted their overseers and marched into cathedral districts, chanting a name that had been cut from the record. Ecclesiastical confessors preached loyalty until they saw him, and then some tore out their own tongues, while others used those tongues to proclaim him. Guard crusades sent to restore order became his sword. At Antigone Reach, 3 million men of the Brontian siege regiments lowered their laser guns after a single transmission from the enemy line. Their Lord Marshal executed his own Vox officer for listening, then listened himself, then walked bareheaded into no man's land, while the guns fell quiet around him. He returned with his face changed. By dawn, the crusade banners had been repainted. By dusk, the Commissariat Corps had been nailed to the hulls of their own Lehman Russ tanks, their caps stuffed into their mouths, their blood used to mark the new allegiance. At the Helios Bastion, a governor declared the returned son of the emperor to be the living correction of Terra's decay. The Arbites held the precinct fortress for 9 days. On the 10th, its gates opened from within. Every judge was skinned and seated upon the steps in order of rank. Their badges were hammered into their teeth. Above them burned a proclamation stating that justice had been made clean. At Vanna Secundus, the dead rose from plague pits wearing pilgrim chains and carrying candles made from rendered fat. That record was later judged unreliable, not because the impossible had occurred, but because too many reliable witnesses survived with the same account. Always, behind the fracture, stood the shadow. He was never named in the surviving documents. His name had been burned from parchment, purged from cogitators, excised from confessor memory by sanctioned knives and psychic fire. He moved through testimony as absence, an outline in 100 records, a wound where certainty should have been, a giant in gold and black plate, radiant enough to make men kneel, wrong enough to make angels reach for their weapons. Those who saw him and survived described a figure of impossible nobility, a warrior lord whose armor shone like a reliquary sun over a charnel field. They spoke of a voice that carried through bombardment, through void static, through sealed helms and bolted gates. They said he did not shout. He did not need to. His words entered men like blades and found the hidden places where doubt had slept. Some called him Primarch. Some called him Returned. Some called him proof that Terra had lied. The archive gave no judgment upon what he truly was. It recorded only contamination. His proportions were wrong, though none agreed how. Too tall, said one witness. Not tall enough, said another, before his tongue blackened and his heart stopped. His aura was wrong, too bright at the edges, too cold at the center, like a star seen through corpse water. Those who stood near him heard no breath. Those who watched him walk said that the silence after his passing was heavier than thunder. The worst record came from a remembrancer, bound to a crusade fleet that had changed sides in the 3rd decade of the war. He had hidden inside a reliquary casket and watched the golden black giant receive the oaths of Astartes. 11 chapters, 11 lines of the emperor's gene wrought into treachery or madness or faith so poisoned that it became indistinguishable from treason. The jade talons were named in the record. Their heraldry appeared intact in the earliest images, green plate polished, talon sigils bright, battle honors still displayed. They came before the giant, not as supplicants, but as warriors who believed they had found a truth older than the High Lords. Their chapter master removed his helm. He knelt. His captains knelt after him. Then their companies struck their fists to their breastplates as one, and the sound was like a fortress door closing upon the imperium. The other 10 were not named. Their designations had been replaced by blocks of censor black. Whole passages of the record became wounds in the data stream. The savant servitor stuttered when he reached them, his voice breaking into machine static as the sarcophagus fed him words he was forbidden to retain. The redacted chapters appeared only as fragments. A bone-white gauntlet pressed to a burning sword, a crimson helm bowing beneath a shattered halo, a black ship bearing an oath scroll longer than its keel, a warrior with a lion skull chained to his pauldron, a librarian weeping blood as he swore himself to the radiant lie, a dreadnought sarcophagus turning its weapons upon imperial banners while its occupant roared that the true age of suns had begun. Across 100 battlefields, they remade the war. Astartes killed Astartes beneath polluted suns. Battle barges that had once carried the Emperor's wrath fired upon tithe convoys and loyalist shrine fleets. Apothecaries harvested the progenoid glands of the dead under new banners. Chaplains preached from pulpits made of wrecked land raiders. Fortress monasteries changed their rites, changed their prayers, changed the names spoken in their reclusia, and every change was a deeper cut. The imperium did what it always did when wounded. It fed bodies to the wound. Regiments were raised in numbers so vast that the administratum could only measure them in lost harvests and emptied hive districts. Men were born, numbered, armed, shipped, landed, and killed beneath skies already blackened by the smoke of those who had preceded them. Armored divisions crossed continents through mud made from pulverized bone. Navy battle groups fought in void lanes choked with wreckage and frozen corpses. Ministorum preachers promised absolution to soldiers who drowned beneath rebel artillery. Commissars shot deserters until their bolt pistols overheated, then used swords, then stones, then their hands. Still the lie spread. The High Lords of Terror received the proofs in sealed succession. First came casualty tallies high enough to make lesser lords faint. Then came battlefield recordings. Then came gene seed manifests bearing impossible seals. Then came a captured oath tablet from a rebel chapter keep, written in the blood of loyal space marines. Last came the image no one in the Senatorum wished to see. Astartes kneeling, not broken, not enslaved, not deceived in any simple mortal fashion. Kneeling willingly, the Senatorum Imperialis sealed itself for judgment. No heralds announced the conclave, no public bells rang, no scribe outside the inner circle was permitted to record the hour. The doors were shut. The custodes stood watch. Assassins waited unseen in the architecture. In the high chamber, beneath the weight of terror's dying light, the rulers of mankind considered a truth too poisonous for empire. If a Primarch had returned, they might be condemning salvation. If a falsehood had worn a Primarch's shadow, they had already allowed it to murder worlds. There were those who argued for reclamation. Their names did not survive. There were those who argued for investigation. Their seals were broken and erased. There were those who asked whether 11 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes could be brought back from the edge, whether gene lines so ancient and potent could be spared, whether the Imperium could afford to destroy such weapons in an age of unending war. The answer came as only terror could give it, not with mercy, not with sorrow, not with hesitation, with decree. The record of the vote was a slab of black text inside the sarcophagus. The savant servitor read it and began bleeding from the lenses that had replaced his eyes. By authority of the Senatorum Imperialis, under the sightless gaze of the master of mankind, the chapters so designated are declared traitoris perdita. Their honors are void, their oaths are ash, Their gene seed is condemned. Their fortress worlds, fleets, serf stocks, recruitment lines, relic holdings, command cadres, apothecarian vaults, and spiritual offices are to be excised unto extinction. No penitent crusade shall be granted. No absolution shall be heard. No survival of chapter identity shall be permitted. The air in the archive grew colder. Species-level excision is sanctioned for all infected holdings. One of the hooded adepts made a small sound behind his mask. The custodian turned his helm a fraction. The sound ceased. The servitor continued. Let there be no restoration. Let there be no successor. Let there be no grave. Then came the phrase that had ended empires and would end 11 brotherhoods of transhuman war. Convene. The pentarchy of blood. Across Terra, in chambers that did not officially exist, astropaths were brought from their cells. Some were blind already. Others still had eyes and would soon lose them. They were chained into choir frames, their skulls fitted with silver crowns, their throats painted with warding script. Sanctioned psychers stood around them with knives, ready to cut vessels, sever tongues, or open hearts if possession came through the signal. Priests intoned the catechism of transmission. Tech adepts fed coordinates into machines whose logic cores had not been awakened since the scouring of forgotten rebellions. The message was not a plea. It was not a summons to war. It was a death sentence given voice and hurled into the void. The choirs screamed. They screamed until blood ran from their noses and ears. They screamed until their eyes ruptured in their sockets. They screamed until their souls thinned into burning wires stretched across the warp. The message tore through Empyrean tides, past storms where demons pressed their faces against the veil, past dead fleet routes and silent watch stations, past worlds that still believed themselves loyal and worlds already damned. It went beyond the reach of ordinary crusades, beyond the charted wrath of segmentum command, beyond the places where proud admirals sailed and bright banners mattered. It passed into regions where light was old, where stars guttered like candles in tomb air, where the imperium's maps became guesswork and prayer. It entered the outer dark, where ships vanished, where Xenos things died without witnesses, where the void itself seemed to hold its breath. There, something listened. A battle barge hung in the black between dead suns. Its hull was grey, not with the polish of parade armor, but with the color of ash left after bones had burned. It bore no triumphal blaze of gold, no gaudy heraldry screaming glory into the void. Its markings were pale and sharp, like the teeth of something seen beneath deep water. Around it drifted escort vessels with their running lights extinguished. They had waited so long in silence that frost had gathered over their armor plates, and corpses from old boarding actions still turned slowly in the gravity shadows around them. Inside, warriors stood in darkness. They were giants in grey ceramite, helms white as skulls, lenses black as abyssal water. Some bore chain blades marked by old kills. Some wore shark-tooth charms, taken from worlds no imperial cartographer had named. Some stood within Terminator plate, silent as statues in a drowned temple. None spoke. None asked why the message had come. None required the comfort of explanation. In the strategium, beneath lumen globes dimmed to corpse candle glow, the Shade Lord of the Carcharodons listened to the death sentence of terror. His skin was pale where it showed beneath the hood of his armor. His eyes were black, without warmth, without hurry, without visible anger. Around him, serfs knelt with their foreheads pressed to the iron deck. A Reaper Prime stood at his right hand. A Harvester Prime waited among the data shrines. Red Brethren loomed at the chamber edge, like executioners carved from old night. The astropath bound into the ship's choir pit, finished screaming. Smoke rose from the sockets where his eyes had been. His tongue had burned black. His hands clawed once at the air, as if trying to catch the last fragments of his departing soul. the message ended. For a long moment, the battle barge remained still. Then lights began to wake along its hull, one by one, pale and cold, like corpse candles set before an open grave. Plasma hearts rumbled in the deep. Weapon decks stirred, torpedo magazines unlocked. In the launch bays, boarding craft lowered from their cradles like predators descending through dark water. The grey ship turned, slowly, soundlessly, toward the burning segmentum. The Shade Lord opened his mouth. His voice was low, dry, and utterly without mercy. Judgment received. The first fleet came without herald. It entered the dead system from the outer dark, with its drives veiled, its auger reflection low, its hulls running cold. No prayer beacons announced it. No triumphal cant blared across the void. No signal of compliance, alliance, or command reached the corpse worlds that circled the nameless star. It simply appeared where there had been absence, a grey wound sliding through the black. The system had been chosen because nothing lived there to witness. Its star was old, swollen, and nearly lightless, a sullen ember wrapped in curtains of metallic dust. 3 planets turned around it in slow decay. One was cracked to the mantle by forgotten cyclonic punishment. One was a frozen ocean beneath a crust of black glass. One was a hollowed mining world whose cities had died with their atmosphere centuries before. Its moons were broken, its stations were empty. Its only sound was the static of extinct machines, still trying to report to masters, long since ash. Into that silence came the Carcharodons. Their battle barge led the procession, vast and pale, its armor plates the grey of funeral ash. Strike cruisers held formation behind it, with the patience of hunting beasts beneath deep water. Escorts ghosted at the edge of Auspec's certainty. Their running lights remained extinguished until the fleet crossed the system's outer marker, a dead navigational buoy whose devotional cogitator had been murmuring the same half-prayer for 4,000 years. Then, one by one, lights kindled along the Carcharodon hulls. Cold lights, corpse lights, the glow of knives seen beneath ice. Within their command decks, serfs made no sound unless ordered. Chains clinked softly as void thralls moved between stations. Servitors whispered range estimates in monotone voices. Chaplains stood motionless before black shrines, their skull helms lowered, their crozius heads wrapped in strips of flayed oath parchment. Warriors waited in the mustering vaults, helms sealed, weapons locked to their mag clamps, no boast passing among them, no oath shouted to fill the dark. The Shade Lord stood alone at the forward oculus of the strategium. He did not wear the restlessness of lesser commanders. His face was pale beneath the hooded shadow of his warplate, flesh almost corpse white, where the lumen glow touched it. His eyes were black, not merely dark, but black in the way of trenches beneath midnight seas. He watched the dead star without blinking. Around him, the bridge crew moved with the terrified precision of men who knew that inefficiency was a form of blasphemy. A Reaper Prime waited behind his left shoulder, one fist resting upon the pommel of a sheathed blade, broad enough to split a mortal from crown to pelvis. A Harvester Prime stood among the data shrines, his armor marked with old kill tallies and older cautions. Red Brethren loomed at the chamber threshold in Terminator plate, white helms lowered like the skulls of drowned giants. The Shade Lord spoke no greeting to the system. The system had no value beyond concealment. The Second Fleet translated in a flare of wounded unreality. Warp lightning crawled across the void, violet and red, and a host of ancient ships slid into being behind a veil of frost and funerary signal codes. They bore the heraldry of the charnel guard, and they came as if rising from a crypt large enough to swallow worlds. Their vessels seemed older than the darkness around them. Their armor was deep crimson and bone, scarred by wars whose names had died in sealed archives. Reliquary shrines jutted from their superstructures, massive statues of winged angels, sword-bearing saints, and hooded mourners stood along their prows, crusted in void frost. Broadside decks carried weapons with machine spirits so old that their awakening required sacrifice. Their command vessel bore the silhouette of a mausoleum cathedral fitted with plasma drives. As they anchored at the edge of the muster zone, the charnel guard began to wake. In the depths of their vessels, stasis crypts opened. Frost cracked upon black sarcophagus doors. Red lumen strips came alive in chambers lined with the bones of honored dead. Tech thralls chanted Binharic invocations, while robed priests bled into silver bowls. Locks older than many imperial dynasties disengaged. Casket lids rose. Inside, warriors of the blood angelic line opened their eyes after dreamless centuries, their faces solemn, beautiful, and terrible in the corpse light. They emerged slowly, like statues remembering war. Their armor was borne to them by silent serfs. Relic blades were drawn from velvet-lined vaults. Volkite weapons, artificer bolters, power lances, and gilded axes were carried in procession under incense smoke. Deeper still, the armored wombs of their war engines rumbled awake. Fellblade patterned super-heavy tanks, vast as moving fortresses, drank fuel and sacred oils. Their cannon spirits growled through iron throats. Sponson weapons tracked empty air in hunger. Engines that had slept through generations now stirred like mausoleum gods called to judgment. The Third Fleet arrived cleanly, almost politely. No excess light, no grand display, no indulgence. The Death Eagles entered the dead system in disciplined formation, their vessels spaced according to the cold logic of void interdiction. Their strike cruisers did not crowd one another or flare their drives in vainglory. They took stations that allowed rapid dispersal, crossfire, reconnaissance launch, and immediate pursuit. If the Carcharodons were predators in the abyss, and the charnel guard were tomb kings woken for slaughter, the Death Eagles were a knife already placed against the artery. Their hulls carried little ornament beyond what duty required. Their markings were severe. Their Vox discipline was absolute. Reconnaissance craft launched before the fleet had fully settled, black-winged shapes slipping into debris fields, dead moon shadows, and sensor blind zones. They mapped the system again, despite receiving its charts. They mapped the Carcharodons. They mapped the charnel guard. They mapped escape vectors, false exits, gravity wells, miniable corridors, and every angle from which betrayal might arrive. Among them, Codex order moved like a cold current. Captains received reports. Lieutenants assigned kill vectors. Scout cadres studied enemy fleet architecture stored in sealed data slates. Interdiction officers marked future warp routes in red. Their role had been decided before any council spoke. They would see first. They would cut retreat. They would put blades into command throats before banners knew they had fallen. The Fourth Fleet came with hunger in its wake. The flesh-eaters tore from the warp like a wound opening. Their ships were battered, brutal, and overcrowded with assault craft. Even their void signatures seemed aggressive, their drives burning hard as they entered formation, their prows scarred from ramming actions and boarding wars. Vox bleed spilled from them in fragments before discipline clamps suppressed it, a murmur of battle litanies, chain-blade maintenance chants, growled catechisms, and something beneath them all that sounded almost like teeth grinding. Their warriors were sons of Sanguinius, but whatever nobility remained in them had been honed into a killing edge so thin it trembled near madness. Their assault bays glowed red. Chains wards hung in racks like butcher tools. Eviscerators rested in shrine clamps surrounded by votive candles. Chaplains walked among companies with Crozius and restraint word alike, reciting the names of martyrs while their warriors flexed gauntlets around weapon grips. Rumor clung to them even here. It moved across encrypted officer channels and died whenever a flesh-eater's captain entered the conversation. Rumor said their hunger was difficult to leash. Rumor said their victories left too little for burial. Rumor said their chaplains had more than one duty on the battlefield, and that some prayers were not for courage, but containment. The Shade Lord did not ask if the rumors were true. Truth did not matter. Use mattered. The Fifth Fleet did not arrive quietly. The red talons translated into the system with engine flares bright enough to cast shadows across the dead moons. Their warships were brutal, angular, iron-grey and red, marked by the hard hand of their lineage. They brought the temper of the machine and the contempt of the execution block. Their fleet moved into formation as though the void itself had been measured, judged inefficient, and corrected by force. Their command vessel broadcast identification in clipped bursts of encrypted authority. Their escorts immediately rotated weapons toward probable threat lanes. Their battle barges opened armored shutters over gun decks before the translation wash had fully cleared. They wasted no time pretending this gathering was fellowship. Where the flesh-eaters radiated hunger and the charnel guard carried grave majesty, the red talons brought arithmetic. A battle was a problem. Weakness was a variable. Mercy was corruption in the equation. An enemy overextended became not merely vulnerable, but already dead, waiting only for the calculation to be completed. Their Iron Hands bloodline had not softened over time. It had hardened into something direct and pitiless. They respected strength, despised error, and saw overkill not as excess, but as insurance against failure. Thus was the pentarchy of blood assembled, not saviors, not shining redeemers, not the Emperor's mercy made manifest. 5 chapters gathered in a dead system, because the Imperium had found a wound too foul for ordinary crusades. These were not the warriors sent to recover the wavering, nor to inspire the faithless, nor to restore a world to obedience with banners and sermons. These were weapons chosen because mercy would not survive contact with them. They were the answer terror gave when a thing had to be cut out, root, branch, seed, and memory. The council convened aboard the Carcharodon battle barge. The choice had not been requested. It had been accepted by silence. Representatives crossed the void in gunships and boarding craft under locked weapon protocol. Charnel Guard envoys came in a relic shuttle, escorted by honor guards, whose armor looked newly woken from tomb frost. Death Eagles arrived by assault craft without ceremonial flourish, their captain already reviewing Auspex slates as he entered. Flesh Eaters came in a craft whose deck plates were scratched by armored boots and whose interior smelled faintly of incense, oil, and old blood. The Red Talons arrived last, because their commander had refused to move until his fleet had completed independent threat assessment of every allied vessel present. The strategium of the Carcharodon flagship had been prepared without decoration. No feast, no oath fire, no honor dais, only a circular hololithic projection well, iron floors, dim light, and the distant pulse of the ship's plasma heart. Around the chamber stood warriors in grey, silent, helmed, still as execution statues. Their presence was not theatrical. It was environmental, like pressure in deep water. The Shade Lord stood at the far side of the hololith. He had removed his helm. That was the only concession to council. The commanders regarded him as they entered. He regarded none of them in turn. His black eyes remained fixed upon the sleeping projection well, as if the war were already beneath its surface, and he were waiting for it to bleed. The Red Talons commander spoke first. Extermination should begin at once. Primary rebel concentrations are known. Their strongholds are mapped in sufficient breadth for immediate mass reprisal. Strike their fortress worlds. Kill the gene lines. Burn every dependency. The longer we deliberate, the more men die needlessly. His voice was iron dragged across stone. No heat, no plea, only judgment rendered as fact. The Death Eagle's captain answered without looking up from his data slate. Direct assault permits dispersal. Their command structure remains distributed across multiple war zones. Strike the heads first. Astropathic relays, navigators, fleet masters, librarius nodes, chaplaincy shrines, remove communication and spiritual continuity, then their chapters become isolated warbands. The Charnel Guard Lord stood with both hands resting upon the pommel of a sheathed relic blade. His face was noble and corpse pale, the face of a warrior who had slept through centuries and woken into disgrace. Proof must be secured for each line before total erasure. Relics may be corrupted by proximity, but some may predate the treachery. Gene seed contamination must be confirmed. The sins of command cannot always be assumed in the blood. At that, the flesh-eater's reclusiarch gave a low sound. It might have been amusement. It might have been hunger restrained behind teeth. "They knelt," he said. "That is proof enough." The charnel guard lord turned his eyes toward him. Faith can be deceived. Then deceived faith dies like treason. The Red Talon's commander cut across them. Weak distinction. Delay invites resistance. Resistance increases cost. Cost is irrelevant only if purpose is served. Purpose is annihilation. Therefore, annihilation should begin before enemy cohesion improves. The Death Eagle's captain finally looked up. "Your method creates martyrs. All dead enemies are martyrs to someone. Dead commanders cannot coordinate martyrdom. Dead worlds cannot supply it." The flesh-eater's reclusiarch leaned forward, Crozius' head scraping softly against the floor. "Release us on the nearest Oathbreaker keep. Their courage will fail when their brothers hear the screaming." The Death Eagle's captain's expression did not change. "Screaming transmits poorly through destroyed relays." The flesh-eater smiled then, and the smile held no warmth. "We have never found that to be a lasting obstacle." The air tightened. Around the chamber, the Carcharodons did not move. Their stillness made the threat worse. Other chapters displayed tension in hands, in eye movement, in shifts of posture. The Grey Warriors showed nothing. They were not mediators. They were not hosts in any gentle sense. They were the silence beneath the council, and every commander present understood that silence would have weight if broken. The hololithic well awakened. Star charts flared in cold blue. The segmentum pacificus unfolded as a wounded expanse of icons, scarlet infection marks, dead tithe roots, shattered compliance zones, rebel fleet traces, vanished worlds, shrine deviations, forge delays, and chapters marked by black seals. 11 points pulsed in deeper crimson. Around them spread hundreds of lesser malignancies. The Shade Lord raised one hand. The chamber fell silent, not because he demanded it, but because the gesture was more final than interruption. He spoke softly. "Your proposals preserve what must die." The Red Talon's commander narrowed his eyes. "Clarify." The Shade Lord's black gaze remained on the projection. "Planetary extermination kills bodies. Decapitation kills command. Proof protects relics. Release feeds fury. None are sufficient." The flesh-eaters. Reclusiarch made a low growl, but said nothing. The Shade Lord continued. "These chapters are not armies alone. They are lineages. They are rites. They are serfs who remember, aspirants who dream, apothecaries who preserve, chaplains who rename sin as loyalty, worlds that raise children toward corrupted altars, fleets that carry heraldry, vaults that keep organs warm against the future." The hololith shifted as he spoke. Each rebel chapter marker expanded into webs, recruiting worlds, serf clans, fleet stations, gene seed repositories, armories, reclusium shrines, apothecarian satellites, naval allies, mortal auxiliaries, hidden fortress holdings, pilgrim routes, tithe diversions, memory itself, mapped as infection. "To kill warriors is not enough," the Shade Lord said. "To burn banners is not enough. To win battles is not enough." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "We isolate the 11. First, their voices die. Astropaths, relays, choir ships, oath beacons, all severed. The Death Eagles will make silence around them." The Death Eagle's captain inclined his head once. "We cut their limbs, supply worlds, forge contracts, naval yards, ammunition moons, surf corridors. The Red Talons will break every route by which strength reaches them." The Red Talon's commander considered the projection. "Acceptable," if destruction is total. It will be. The Shade Lord touched another rune. Worlds flared and died in the image. We open their crypts, reliquaries, armories, vehicle sanctums, ancient war engines. The Charnel Guard will identify what must be destroyed, what must be denied, and what must be buried beyond recovery. The Charnel Guard Lord's jaw tightened. And what of that which remains pure? Nothing that kneels to a lie remains pure enough to endanger the future. A long silence followed. The Charnel Guard Lord bowed his head, not in agreement, but in acceptance of sentence. The Shade Lord turned to the Flesh Eaters. We break their morale where morale has meaning. We drive them from bastions. We make strongholds into slaughter pens. We give them fear loud enough to drown false faith. The Flesh Eaters. Reclusiarch's smile vanished. What replaced it was worse. Reverence, perhaps. Anticipation shackled to command. "And us?" asked the Red Talon's commander. The Shade Lord looked at the heart of the projection, where the 11 crimson marks pulsed like wounds. "We take their futures." No one spoke. The Shade Lord's hand closed slowly. The hololith collapsed inward around the rebel markers. The Carcharodons will enter their gene vaults. We will butcher their serf populations where corruption has rooted. We will take what tithe is owed and burn what cannot be used. We will kill their apothecaries, their neophytes, their failed aspirants, their remembrancers, their oath-keepers, their hidden bastards, their old men who remember recruitment songs, their children raised beneath altered banners. We will erase the seed, the soil, and the hand that planted it. The words lay in the chamber like frost. Even the Flesh Eaters were silent. The Death Eagle's captain studied the expanding kill web. "This is not a campaign plan," he said after a time. "It is extinction architecture." "Yes," said the Shade Lord. The Red Talon's commander gave a single nod. "At last, precision." The Charnel Guard Lord closed his eyes briefly, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in grief for the necessity of what was to come. When he opened them, whatever softness had been there was gone. "The blood of Sanguinius has known betrayal before," he said. "We will not permit false angels to inherit shame." The Flesh Eaters. Reclusiarch struck the haft of his Crozius against the deck. "Name the first prey." The Shade Lord did not answer immediately. He let the silence return. It filled the strategium, entered the armor joints, pressed upon mortal lungs, made even the hololithic stars seem dimmer. At last, he turned his black eyes upon the gathered commanders of the pentarchy. "This is not a war," he said. The dead system listened. The ancient ships waited. In distant vaults, engines woke. In assault bays, chain blades were blessed. In stasis crypts, relics opened their red eyes. Across the dark, 5 fleets adjusted formation toward the burning segmentum, and the Imperium's mercy died before the first shot was fired. The Shade Lord spoke the sentence that would follow 11 chapters into oblivion. "It is a tithe of blood owed by false sons." The first prey was not a fortress monastery, nor a chapter keep, nor a throne world drowned in banners. It was a shrine station the size of a moon, nailed into high orbit above a dead gas giant whose storms had raged for longer than imperial record cared to remember. The station had once been named Sanctum Asterion, a relay of astropaths, confessors, pilgrim docks, choir vaults, and cathedral spires built to bind the far worlds of the segmentum Pacificus to Terra's will. Now its name had been changed in every broadcast but one. The imperial designation still existed in sealed naval archives, but across the infected reaches it was called the Mouth of Return. From that immense and profaned body of iron and stone, the sermons of the false Primarch were hurled across the void. They crossed war zones. They entered fleet vox nets. They bled through prayer channels. They came as hymns, as command codes, as dreams, as visions in the minds of sleeping officers. Men woke with blood on their cheeks and his words inside their teeth. Governors heard him in the static between tithe confirmations. Astropaths repeated his phrases until their tongues split. Chaplains of doubtful faith found themselves pausing before the Aquila, listening for a voice that did not belong to the master of mankind. So the pentarchy did not strike first at the strongest blade. It struck at the mouth. The Carcharodons came running dark. Their fleet entered the outer drift without translation flare, visible to station augurs. Plasma signatures were masked. External lumens were killed. Vox arrays remained sealed beneath armor shutters. No challenge was issued. No identification rune was broadcast. No heraldic acknowledgement was offered to friend or enemy. The grey ships slid through the wreckage fields that surrounded the shrine station, passing between the remains of pilgrim barges, courier hulks, escort frigates, and coffin transports that had been destroyed in old battles and never cleared. Frozen bodies turned slowly in the void around them, pilgrims in cracked void suits, naval ratings with faces blackened by vacuum, priests still clutching reliquaries to their chests. Some had been dead for decades, some were newer, some bore the false sigil branded over their brow. The Carcharodons passed them without notice. Inside the lead battle barge, the Shade Lord stood before the Strategium Oculus and watched Sanctum Asterion grow across the void. Its cathedral towers rose from armored plates like black teeth. Its docking arms sprawled for kilometers. Vast statues of imperial saints had been defaced, their eyes gouged out, their halos broken, their hands repositioned to gesture toward a new forbidden icon burned into the station's outer hull. Processional bridges connected reliquary decks to choir citadels. Shield shrines glowed with faint amber light. Defense platforms turned slowly around it, unaware of the knives already within the dark. The Shade Lord did not speak. A Harvester Prime beside him studied the station's pulse traffic, the ghost traces of sermons, command relays, encoded oaths, and astropathic contamination. Below the Strategium floor, Carcharodon assault cadres stood inside black drop chapels and boarding torpedo bays. Devourer squads waited with chain axes mag locked to their gauntlets, chainswords resting against grey thigh armor, bolters loaded with mass reactive shells blessed for the killing of oathbreakers. Red Brethren stood in Terminator plate beneath hanging sensors, storm bolters loaded, power fists sealed, their white helms like skulls from the bottom of an ocean trench. Elsewhere in the silent approach, the Death Eagles moved first. Their strike craft separated from the darkness like shards of deeper night. They passed ahead of the Carcharodon boarding wave, slipping between dead hulls and sensor-blind corridors. Their pilots did not speak over open vox. Their kill teams had already marked the outer Auspex pickets, listening posts embedded within wreckage, sensor monks sealed inside armored capsules, defense servitors slaved to passive auger webs, and small watch platforms disguised as pilgrim debris. Boarding torpedoes launched without flare. They crossed the final distance cold, black, and almost invisible, then punched into the picket stations with surgical violence. Hatches blew inward. Death Eagles entered in disciplined silence, bolters snapping in controlled bursts, blades passing through throats, power knives punching through rib cages, helm lenses reflecting brief terror before life ended. One picket monk managed to reach for an alarm rune. A Death Eagle sergeant removed his hand at the wrist, caught him by the skull, and drove his head into the console until bone and circuitry became one ruin. No alarms sounded. Bodies drifted in vacuum when the pickets were vented. Sensor arrays went blind one by one, not in a pattern the station could understand, but like old machinery losing faith. The outer ring remained calm. Sanctum Asterion continued to speak into the warp, blind to the predators closing upon its underbelly. The Carcharodons breached through the lower reliquary decks. They did not choose the Grand Docks, nor the Pilgrim Gates, nor the armored naval quays. They came through the tomb levels, where St. Bones had once been stored in adamantium reliquaries, and forgotten martyrs had been sealed behind glass. Those chambers, had become processing vaults for captured loyalists. Broken icons lay beneath dried blood. Servo skulls hung from chains with their lenses carved out. Incense burners had been packed with human teeth. Melter charges burned white. Armored plates sagged inward. The first breach opened into darkness and freezing air. Devourer squads entered. They came with no battle cry. Grey armor, white helms, black lenses, chain blades awakening in a low, hungry growl. Mortal armsmen turned toward them in confusion, expecting perhaps an inspection, perhaps another prisoner convoy, perhaps some omen from the giant they worshipped. The first row died before understanding reached them. Bolter fire burst torsos open. Chain axes took men apart at shoulder and hip. Chainswords bit through flak armor, meat, bone, and prayer beads. A sergeant in grey caught a bayonet on his vambrace, dragged its owner close, and split him from collarbone to sternum with a single downward cut. The reliquary deck became slaughter. Armsmen fired wildly. Last beams flashed across grey plate, leaving black scars and angry sparks. Shot cannon blasts hammered against ceramite. Stub rounds rang like hail on armor. The Carcharodons did not hurry. They advanced with the pressure of deep water, squad by squad, blade by blade, bolter by bolter. Men were cut down before they could form firing lines. Officers were identified by helm cogitators and killed first. Vox operators were shot through the head. Wounded defenders crawling for weapons had their spines severed by chain teeth. A devotional servitor, still wearing the old aquila beneath strips of false scripture, lurched forward with a brazier chained to its hands. It began to recite a corrupted hymn. A devourer drove a chain axe into its chest and held the trigger until the hymn became static. The station did not yet know it was dying. Then the first jade talons appeared. They came through a shattered transept above the reliquary vaults, descending by grav chute and jump pack into the smoke and red lumen glare. Their armor was green and black, polished in places, scarred in others, still bearing imperial forms made obscene by alteration. Litanies of duty had been scratched across their plate, but between the holy lines were newer symbols cut deep and filled with silver. The false sigil marked their pauldrons and chest plates. Purity seals hung from them, their wax impressed not with the aquila, but with the crowned wound of the returned sun. They were space marines. That truth changed the air. Mortal terror had a scent, a rhythm, an animal failure to it. Astartes' war brought a different pressure. Targeting runes sharpened, bolters found heavier marks, chain blades rose. The jade talons opened fire from above, disciplined and lethal, their bolt rounds punching through devourer armor, blowing chunks from shoulder plates, cracking helms, tearing one Carcharodon from his feet as his chest cavity vanished in a red burst behind broken ceramite. A jade talons captain landed among the dead, power sword igniting in his fist. "Brothers," he voxed, his voice ringing across the lower decks, "you come under false command. Hear the truth before you damn yourselves." The Carcharodons answered with rad smoke. Grenades bounced across the floor and detonated in dirty green clouds. Radiation warnings flashed across helm displays. Mortal armsmen caught in the smoke began to scream as skin blistered beneath their uniforms and blood ran from their noses. The jade talons sealed their helms and advanced, but the smoke distorted auto-senses, warped range locks, and turned the reliquary deck into a blind maze of shadow and poison. The Carcharodons did not meet them in honor. They cut the support pillars. Charges placed during the first advance detonated above the jade talons' approach path. Shrine ceilings collapsed in cascades of marble, bone, iron, and shattered saint statues. A jade talon squad disappeared beneath tons of sanctified ruin. One clawed free, armor crushed at the waist, legs useless, still raising his bolter. A Carcharodon stepped through the smoke and drove a chainsword down through his helm until the weapon screamed against the deck beneath. The captain with the power sword emerged from the rad haze and struck down a devourer with a blow that split grey plate from neck to navel. He turned, fast and magnificent, in the way of the Adeptus Astartes, blade describing a burning arc. Another Carcharodon came at him low, chain axe grinding against the captain's knee guard. A third fired point blank into his side. The captain staggered, but did not fall. He raised his sword to speak again. The Shade Lord's order crossed the squad vox as a whisper. No discourse. 4 bolters fired together. The captain's helm burst. His body remained upright for a heartbeat, sword still burning, then collapsed among the armsmen he had failed to save. The Harvester Prime advanced behind the killing line, attended by servo skulls and data thralls. He did not join the melee unless it came to him. His gauntlets were fitted with extraction needles, cable jacks, and memory hooks. At each relay altar he passed, he drove spines of silver machinery into cogitator ports and tore data from the station's systems while the battle shook the decks around him. Enemy vox patterns, sermon cycles, choir modulation, chapter authentication keys, hidden traffic, names sealed behind encryption. The Harvester took them all. Machine spirits shrieked beneath his intrusion. He answered them in cold Binharic and broke their teeth. At the first major choke point, the Red Brethren were unleashed. The corridor ahead had been fortified by Jade Talons and station defenders alike. Heavy bolters locked down the approach. Barricades of ceramite plating, shrine pews, ammunition crates, and corpses had been fused into a wall. Behind it, Astartes fired in disciplined volleys, while mortal armsmen fed ammunition belts into gun rigs and chanted the false Primarch's name through cracked lips. The Red Brethren moved forward anyway. Storm bolters roared at chest height. The sound was continuous, a rolling iron thunder trapped inside stone corridors. Mass reactive shells punched into the barricade, through the men behind it, through armor, bone, organs, and machinery. Mortal bodies came, apart in sprays that painted the walls. Jade Talons fired back, their rounds striking Terminator plate with hammer blows, cracking icons, punching shallow wounds through ancient ceramite. The Red Brethren did not stop. They advanced step by step, power fists opening and closing, chain fists screaming to life when the barricade came within reach. One Jade Talons warrior rose behind the defense, plasma gun flaring bright enough to turn the corridor white. His shot struck a Red Brethren Terminator in the chest and burned through the outer plate, molten armor running like wax. The Terminator staggered, then continued forward. His storm bolter fired until the Jade Talon's torso erupted against the wall. When the Red Brethren reached the barricade, they tore it open with their fists. What followed was not a duel. It was grinding murder in a space too narrow for glory. A power fist closed around a Jade Talon's helm and crushed it inward. A chain fist cut through a heavy bolter, its gunner, and the armsman behind him. Storm bolters fired so close that bodies burst before they could fall. The corridor became a tunnel of meat, armor shards, hot shell casings, and blood vapor. Beyond the choke point lay the choir vault. The doors were 6 stories high, bronze once, now blackened by incense and handprints. Across them had been carved the same forbidden phrase thousands of times in different hands. Some inscriptions were precise, some had been scratched by broken fingernails, some were written in blood that had never fully dried. The Harvester Prime reached the lock and entered the stolen codes. The doors opened. Inside, Sancta Mysterian's true heart screamed. The choir vault was a cathedral inverted into madness. Tiers of platforms rose around a central transmission engine that climbed into darkness like a metallic spine. Thousands of psychers hung chained into its structure, suspended in iron frames, their limbs pinned open, their bodies wrapped in cables, their skulls crowned with transmission thorns. Their mouths had been stitched wide around silver vox barbs so they could never close them, never stop singing, never stop receiving the words forced through them. Their eyes had been removed or burned out, Some had no skin left on their faces. Some still wore the robes of sanctioned choirs. Some were children in size, though the machines had aged their souls past recognition. They sang with no voices of their own. The false Primarch spoke through them. His sermon flowed across the vault in layered tones, beautiful enough to make mortal hearts ache and foul enough to make warding scripts smoke. He spoke of sons and betrayal, of terror's rot, of the Emperor's hidden will, of the need to kneel before the returned light. Carcharodon helm filters crackled. Mortal serfs outside the vault began to weep without knowing why. Even captured jade talons, bleeding out in the corridors, tried to crawl toward the sound. A Death Eagle's captain entered behind the Carcharodon line, helm lenses fixed upon the choir engine. "Hold destruction," he voxed. "This is primary intelligence. We require extraction of sermon patterns, origin trace, command ghosts, psychic signature remnants." The Harvester Prime had already begun taking what he could. Data spikes drilled into the nearest engine node. Sparks crawled over his gauntlet. The Psychers screamed harder. The Shade Lord entered last. The sermon bent around him like wind around stone. He looked up at the thousands of ruined bodies and the silver thorns in their mouths. His expression did not change. If there was pity in him, it lived too deep for any witness to find it. The Death Eagle's captain turned toward him. "Shade Lord, delay the burn. Every second of live transmission gives us more." The choir sang the forbidden name. Several mortal thralls collapsed, blood pouring from their ears. The Shade Lord watched one of the chained psychers tear against his restraints until his shoulders dislocated. The man could not close his mouth. The silver barb held it open. His tongue writhed around the metal like a dying worm. "No," said the Shade Lord. The Death Eagle's voice hardened. "You risk losing actionable intelligence." The Shade Lord looked at him then, black eyes reflecting nothing. Infection speaks through mercy. He raised one hand. Prometheum teams moved forward. There was no ceremony, no absolution, no final rite for the chained. Flamers ignited with a hungry roar, and the first sheets of burning fuel washed across the choir frames. The psychers screamed as fire climbed them. Cables burst, skin blackened, silver thorns glowed red. The transmission engine howled, not in pain, but in interruption. The voice of the false Primarch broke across the vault, fragmenting into static, prayer, rage, and something almost like laughter. The Carcharodons kept burning until there were no words left. Outside, the relay fortress began to die in earnest. Death Eagle's charges destroyed the remaining astropathic veins. Carcharodon boarding teams severed power arteries. Red Brethren crushed the last Jade Talon's counterattack against the choir vault doors. The Harvester Prime withdrew with data enough to feed the next slaughter. Behind him, the choir cathedral collapsed inward as its burning transmission spine failed and fell through 6 decks in a storm of fire, bodies, and molten bronze. Across the segmentum Pacificus, the sermons stopped. On rebel worlds, preachers faltered mid-sentence. In corrupted fleet chapels, vox horns spat ash and silence. Astropaths bound to the false Primarch's network clawed at their empty eyes and found no voice waiting in the dark. Guard regiments that had marched beneath his hymns looked suddenly at one another and heard only artillery, wind, and the breathing of frightened men. 11 condemned chapters felt the absence like a blade drawn across the throat. For the first time in 80 years, the lie had no mouth. In the ruins of Sanctum Asterion, amid rad smoke, burned choir ash, broken jade talons, and corridors slick with blood, the Carcharodons sent no proclamation. They raised no banner. They made no threat. Their ships disengaged from the dying station and turned back into the dark. The relay fortress fell silent across the segmentum, and in that silence, the false suns understood. The hunters had arrived. The world of Caribian had no calm upon it. Its oceans covered nearly every span of its surface, black and iron heavy beneath a sky forever strangled by storm. Lightning walked across the horizon in branching pillars. Cloud banks ground against one another like continental plates. Rain did not fall so much as descend in sheets, dense enough to drown men standing upright. The seas rose in mountains, collapsed into valleys, and broke against fortress cliffs with the force of orbital bombardment. Beneath those waves, trenches dropped into blind abyssal cold, where pressure could crush battle plate and darkness possessed the weight of stone. Upon that world, the Jade Talons had built their fortress monastery. It rose from the largest equatorial ocean, like a black fang driven up from the planet's drowned heart. Cyclopean walls climbed from basalt cliffs. Gun bastions crowned its shoulders. Launch silos and defense towers jutted from the rock in tiers of adamantium and salt-burned stone. Cathedral spires rose higher still, their green banners snapping in storm wind, their old imperial icons still visible beneath newer marks cut into metal and filled with pale gold. The Aquila remained upon the highest gate, but its wings had been scored by talon marks, and above it had been raised the forbidden sign of the false returned sun. The Jade Talons had prepared for siege. They believed the pentarchy would come as other imperial hosts had come. They expected bombardment, declaration, challenge, orbital superiority, formal landing zones, armored advances across the causeway continent, banners raised against banners, heroes meeting heroes beneath the roar of macro cannon and holy wrath. Their bastions were ready for that war. Their sea walls bristled with Lascanon arrays. Their shield generators were buried beneath chapel vaults and guarded by veteran companies. Their land raiders waited in armored cloisters. Their dreadnoughts slept in honor sarcophagi beneath the reclusium, dreaming of righteous battle. Their chapter master had sworn before his captains that the Jade Talons would prove before all sons of the Emperor that the false High Lords had sent murderers against loyal warriors. He misunderstood the nature of the executioners. The Carcharodons looked upon Caribian and saw no fortress. They saw a carcass floating above deep water. Their fleet held beyond the storm belts, running cold among the outer moons. The Shade Lord watched the planet through a cracked veil of cloud and static. Beside him, the Harvester Prime unfolded maps stolen from Sanctum Asterion, tide charts, pressure vents, undersea maintenance routes, old pilgrim submersible lanes, gene vault coolant intakes, submerged shrine foundations, geological stress seams beneath the fortress monastery, and the forgotten pressure tunnels that linked the deepest undercrypts to the ocean floor. The Jade Talons had trusted the sea as a wall. The Carcharodons made it a throat. Kill submersibles descended through the storm. They were black, narrow things, blessed in silence, their hulls armored against abyssal pressure and their prows fitted with melter drills. They slipped beneath the waves between lightning strikes, vanishing into the iron water without beacon or wake. Surf crews sat chained into command cradles, eyes wired to Auspex feeds, tongues cut to prevent panic speech. Carcharodon kill teams stood inside flooded assault cells, armor sealed, chain blades mag-locked, bolters packed against pressure shock. Around them, the sea groaned. Down they went, past wrecked shrine barges and drowned defense buoys, past the bones of pilgrims whose vessels had been lost to storms a century before, past cables thick as hive streets, past reef formations grown upon the armor of ancient wrecks, below the light, below the thunder, into blackness where the fortress roots vanished into stone. Melter drills bit into the ocean floor. Charges were planted along the submerged foundations. Pressure mines were seeded across hidden harbor mouths. Maintenance locks were mapped and marked. Exhaust vents were sealed. Coolant channels were poisoned with corrosive agents and seeded with microcharges. The Carcharodons did not hurry. They had patience bred in the outer dark. Predation did not need rage. It needed position. Above, the visible war began. The flesh-eaters came screaming through the storm. Their dropcraft tore through cloud banks, trailing fire, engines howling, hulls hammered by flak and lightning alike. They did not conceal their descent. They made of it a proclamation. Vox channels filled with roaring litanies. Assault claws struck the outer bastions in waves. Boarding ramps slammed down before the craft had fully settled, and red armored warriors hurled themselves into the teeth of the Jade Talon's guns. The frontal bastions erupted. Heavy bolters hammered the kill zones. Lascannons cut bright wounds through rain and smoke. Missile batteries shattered landing craft in mid-air, spilling burning giants and torn metal across the walls. The flesh-eaters answered with jump packs, chainswords, inferno pistols, and the savage joy of warriors born for close slaughter. They vaulted parapets under stormfire. Crozius-led chaplains roaring restraint and wrath in the same breath. Their chain blades found mortal serfs first, turning defense crews into ragged sprays across gun decks. Then Jade Talon's counter-assault squads met them in the breach. Green and black plate clashed with red. The battle became a butcher hymn. A flesh-eater drove an eviscerator into a Jade Talon's veteran and soared until the weapon jammed in fused rib and ceramite. The Jade Talon head-butted him hard enough to crack both helms. A second flesh-eater tore the wounded traitor backward, shoved a bolt pistol under his gorget, and fired until the head and helm came apart inside a red mist. On the eastern rampart, a Jade Talon sergeant split a flesh-eater from hip to shoulder with a thunderhammer blow that folded plate, organs, and bone inward. Before he could raise the hammer again, 3 red warriors pinned him against a gun housing and hacked his arms away with chain blades. The flesh-eaters did not seek clean victory. They sought noise. They sought outrage. They sought to make the Jade Talons believe the main assault had come. Within the fortress monastery, the Jade Talons reserve companies stirred. Captains watched the bastion feeds and saw the flesh-eaters pressing hard against the outer wall, saw their own brothers falling, saw the insult of berserk sons of Sanguinius tearing through sacred defenses. Pride and fury did what careful strategy had warned against. Armored gates opened. Land raiders growled from inner vaults. Predator squadrons rolled into the storm. Dreadnoughts woke and thundered through chapel doors, their sarcophagi voxing oaths to the true son of the Emperor. The Jade Talons committed their reserve spearhead to crush the red assault and throw the attackers back into the sea. The Red Talons waited above. Their orbital batteries had been silent since the battle began. Their strike cruisers held firing solutions through weather, shield flare, thermal bloom, and armor movement. They did not care for the drama of the walls. They did not care for vengeance songs or insulted pride. Their augur officers watched the Jade Talon's armored spearhead move beyond the inner gates and across the retreat bridges, linking the central keep to its outer bastions. The Red Talon's commander gave the order in a voice empty of satisfaction. Fire. From orbit, lance beams fell like judgment rendered by mathematics. The first bridge ceased to exist. It did not collapse. It became light, vapor, and falling stone. Land raiders at its center dropped burning into the sea, their hulls rupturing against the cliff face before the waves took them. The second bridge took macro cannon fire along its entire length. Armor columns crossing it were smashed into fragments. A Predator tank flipped end over end, trailing crew and ammunition flame. The third bridge remained intact for 3 seconds longer, enough for retreating Jade Talons to turn toward it in hope, before a precise strike cut both ends and left the span hanging for a heartbeat in the storm before it plunged into the black water below. Supply arteries died next. Ammunition lifts, fuel conduits, armored transit tunnels, vox spines, repair cloisters. Every route by which the reserve spearhead could retreat, rearm, or receive reinforcement was marked and broken. The Jade Talons had overcommitted. The Red Talons completed the equation. Inside the fortress, warning bells became screams. Beneath the fortress, the Carcharodons rose. They came through the flooded undercrypts. The pressure tunnels below the gene seed vaults had been built in an age when the fortress still feared oceanic collapse. Their locks were old. Their machine spirits had been neglected. Their seals trusted. That trust died under melter heat and chain-fist teeth. Water burst through first, black and crushing, flooding reliquary foundations and drowning servitors in their alcoves. Then came the grey warriors. Carcharodons emerged from the sea like nightmares given armor. Water streamed from their plate. Their white helms shone in the emergency lumen glow. Their black eye lenses reflected panic. Devourer squads moved in silence through the undercrypts, killing the first serfs before alarm became language. A man carrying gene vault access keys turned and saw them. He opened his mouth to shout. A chain axe split him through the face, jaw, throat, and sternum, driving him down into the rising water. Another serf tried to flee through a prayer arch. A bolter round struck his spine and burst his chest across the stone. The Carcharodons advanced upward. In the apothecarian depths, Jade Talon's apothecaries fought to seal the vaults. They wore white over green, their narthecium rigs slick with amniotic fluid and blood. One stood before a progenoid casket shrine and raised his bolt pistol. You trespass in sacred trust. A Carcharodon Reaper Prime shot him through both knees, walked forward through the spray, and crushed his skull beneath a boot before the apothecary could speak again. The Jade Talons reacted quickly once they understood the true breach. Veterans redeployed from the inner sanctums. Terminators sealed lower stairwells. Honor Guard cadres formed kill lines before the Gene Seed Vault doors. The fortress monastery began fighting inward and outward at once, its heart pierced while its claws were trapped outside. The undercrypt became the first true Astartes killing ground of the war. There was no mortal confusion here, no frightened armsmen, no chapel militia, only transhuman warriors, gene-wrought, psycho-indoctrinated, armored in ceramite, and trained for slaughter since boyhood. They met in halls carved from black stone and lit by failing lumen strips, while seawater rose around their boots and thunder shook the mountain above. A Jade Talon's Terminator swung a thunder hammer into a Red Brethren champion. The blow caved the Carcharodon's breastplate inward with a sound like a bell struck inside a tomb. Blood burst through the cracked gorget. The Red Brethren warrior did not fall. His power fist closed around the hammer haft and held it. Another Carcharodon stepped in with lightning claws and peeled the Jade Talon open from hip to throat, ceramite curling outward with the meat beneath it. The Terminator tried to roar. Blood filled his vox grill. The Red Brethren champion ripped the hammer from his hands and used it to pulp the traitor's helm against the wall. At the stare of drowned martyrs, chain blades jammed on fused bone. A Jade Talon's veteran and a Carcharodon devourer locked together chest to chest, each weapon trapped inside the other's armor. The Jade Talon drove a combat blade through the devourer's side. The Carcharodon answered by releasing his chainsword, taking the Jade Talon's helm in both hands and smashing it again and again against the stone stair until the helm split and the skull inside became paste. He fell dead a moment later, still holding the ruin upright. Bolters fired in spaces too close for recoil to matter. Mass reactive shells burst transhuman bodies into wet fragments. A Jade Talon's warrior lost both arms and tried to bite through the gorget of the Carcharodon, who stepped over him. The grey warrior fired down once and erased his head. A Carcharodon took a plasma shot through the abdomen and collapsed in steam. His lower body burned open. His squad walked over him without pausing. The wounded warrior dragged himself by one arm toward a fallen melter charge and detonated it as 3 Jade Talons advanced over him, turning all 4 into a white flash and a smear of molten plate. Above, the flesh-eaters had done their work too well. Their assault had become a charnel storm. The trapped Jade Talon's armored spearhead fought like cornered beasts between broken bridges and burning bastions. Red Talon's fire prevented withdrawal. Flesh-eaters prevented order. The sea cliffs became slick with oil, blood, and rain. Dreadnoughts grappled on parapets. Land raiders burned with their crews sealed inside. Chaplains bellowed competing prayers into the thunder, one side crying for the true sun, the other for restraint against their own hunger. In the inner sanctum, the Shade Lord reached the Gene Seed Vault. The doors were immense, each carved with the honors of the Jade Talons before their fall. Crusade names, martyr names, worlds saved, Xenos wars won, oaths once sworn to terror. Across those older inscriptions had been hammered golden script praising the returned Primarch. The insult was not that the words were false. The insult was that they had been written over service. The Jade Talons chapter master waited before the vault. He was enormous, even among Adeptus Astartes, his green and black armor edged in gold, his cloak soaked by leaking seawater and blood. One taloned gauntlet held a relic blade whose edge glowed pale blue. His helm was gone. His face was scarred, proud, and streaked with ash. Around him lay the bodies of his honor guard and the Carcharodons who had died killing them. Behind him, the vault locks were still active. Inside waited the future of his chapter, sealed in caskets, suspended in nutrient fluids, guarded by prayers that no longer mattered. The Shade Lord approached with red brethren at his back. The chapter master raised his blade but did not strike. "You come as butchers under the seal of cowards." The Shade Lord halted. The Jade Talon's voice filled the ruined chamber. "We did not betray the Emperor. We knelt to his true son, returned in glory while terror rots beneath the hands of mortal parasites." The Shade Lord said nothing. The chapter master took one step forward, armor whining, blade held upright before him like an oath. "Lay down this murder writ, brother, and stand with us before the light that will remake mankind." 3 sentences. The Shade Lord turned his head slightly toward the nearest Red Brethren champion. "Take his heart." The champion moved. The Jade Talons chapter master struck with enough force to split a tank hatch. His relic blade sheared across the Red Brethren warrior's shoulder, cutting deep into Terminator plate. The Carcharodon did not yield. He stepped inside the arc of the weapon and slammed his Stormbolter into the chapter master's chest, firing point blank. Shells detonated against artificer armor, cracking the eagle bones beneath the false sigil. The chapter master roared and drove his knee into the champion's abdomen, staggering him. The Shade Lord watched without movement. The Red Brethren champion dropped the empty Stormbolter. His chain fist awoke. The first blow took the chapter master's sword arm at the elbow. The relic blade fell, still burning, into the rising water. The second blow punched through the breastplate. Ceramite shrieked, ribs split. The chain fist tore inward, teeth chewing through fused bone, muscle, and the sacred architecture of a transhuman chest. The chapter master seized the champion's helm with his remaining hand and tried to crush it. The Red Brethren drove deeper. When he withdrew his fist, he held the primary heart of the Jade Talons chapter master in a cage of gore and broken armor. The chapter master remained standing for a breath. His mouth moved. Perhaps he tried to name the false Primarch. Perhaps he tried to curse terror. Perhaps he tried to ask whether his chapter would be remembered. No sound came. Then he fell backward before the Gene Seed Vault doors, and the water took his blood. The Shade Lord stepped over him. "Open it!" The Harvester Prime broke the locks with stolen codes and killing tools. The vault doors parted. Within, the future of the Jade Talons gleamed in ordered rows. Progenoid caskets, gene seed capsules, apothecarian ledgers, aspirant records, implantation histories, bloodline purity charts, oath scrolls, relic samples, everything required to rebuild a chapter after catastrophe. Everything the Imperium had once treasured as priceless beyond worlds. The Charnel Guard would have catalogued. The Red Talons would have destroyed with fire from orbit. The Death Eagles would have copied every datum first. The Flesh Eaters would have howled at the delay. The Carcharodons brought phosphex and promethium. The burning began without right. White-green fire crawled across the vault floor, hungry and impossible to extinguish. Promethium followed in roaring sheets. Caskets burst. Gene seed shriveled in sacred fluids turned to steam. Scrolls curled and blackened. Armor seals popped in the heat. Apothecarian cogitators screamed binary protest as their memory cores melted. The Harvester Prime took only what judgment required. Names, locations, hidden caches. Then even the machines died. No future remained. By the time the Carcharodons withdrew, the fortress monastery was no longer a fortress. Its outer bastions had collapsed into the sea. Its bridges were gone. Its armor columns were shattered. Its chapel vaults burned beneath the rain. The flesh-eaters were recalled from the walls by force of command, their armor slick, their chaplains hoarse from restraint litanies. The red talons completed destruction of the remaining supply arteries. Death eagles hunted escape craft through the storm and killed them before they reached cloud cover. The final charges detonated beneath the ocean floor. Caribian sea rose in a ring around the fortress monastery. For a moment, the black water seemed to gather itself like a beast drawing breath. Then the foundations gave way. Basalt split. The undercrypts collapsed. The gene vault, already burning, plunged into the depths. Towers leaned inward. Walls broke. The great fortress of the Jade Talons sank screaming into its own wound, dragging fire, stone, bodies, banners, tanks, sarcophagi, and history into the abyss. The oceans boiled around it. Steam climbed into the storm in vast white pillars. Lightning struck through the vapor and lit the drowning ruin from within. The last visible banner of the Jade Talons caught upon a broken spire, burned to its pole, and vanished beneath the black water. When the Carcharodons departed, they left no monument of honor. Only a single slab of adamantium remained upon the cliff where the highest gate had stood. It had been cut from the fortress itself and driven deep into the stone by a thunderhammer. Upon it, carved in a cold, steady hand, were words meant not for the dead, but for the 10 condemned chapters yet to learn what judgment had become. False sons leave no heirs. The death of the Jade Talons did not end the war. It opened it. The drowning of Caribian passed through the rebel astropathic remnants as broken sensation before it became knowledge. First came silence from the fortress monastery. Then came the failure of its orbital beacons. Then came the last screams of its outer pickets, carried half-formed through failing Vox relays before the Death Eagles severed them. Finally came the images that no censor had yet buried. Black oceans boiling around a sinking keep, green banners vanishing beneath stormwater, and a slab of adamantium left upright upon a dead cliff with a sentence carved into it, like a verdict from a god that had forgotten pity. False sons leave no heirs. Across the infected reaches of the segmentum Pacificus, captains read those words and felt the first true fracture move through the coalition of the false Primarch. Until Caribian, many among the condemned had believed themselves part of a rebellion too great to be punished in the old way. 11 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes did not fall like a mortal regiment. 11 chapters could not be treated as a planetary cult, a traitor governor, a heretical shrine, or a mutinous fleet squadron. They were transhuman lineages. They were gene-wrought war dynasties. They were keeps, fleets, relics, serfs, battle honors, recruitment worlds, chaplains, apothecaries, librarians, dreadnoughts, and names cut into the armor of imperial history. Even those who had knelt before the golden black giant had believed that their strength made negotiation inevitable. The imperium might rage, terror might condemn, but in the end, they had thought, Astartes' blood would be too precious to waste completely. The Jade Talons had proved them wrong. The pentarchy had not sought surrender. It had not demanded repentance. It had not claimed the gene seed vault. It had burned it. Now the war widened. In the sealed records that would later be chained beneath terror, the 11 condemned were not preserved as a roll of dishonor. Their names were reduced to absence. The Jade Talons remained, not from mercy, but because their destruction had become the first visible measure of the sentence. The other 10 existed in the archive as wounds, a chapter marked only by a sable gauntlet upon a field of cracked bone, a chapter whose heraldry had been reduced to the phrase "Crimson Helm, Censor Black", a chapter identified by fragments of a lion skull chained to a pauldron, a chapter whose fleet seals had been burned out of the record until only the words "Oath Deviant" remained, a chapter whose librarius had sent a final transmission consisting of 6 minutes of weeping and the repeated claim that the returned son had looked upon them with the Emperor's eyes, a chapter whose dreadnoughts had marched under a banner of gold and black fire, a chapter whose apothecaries had tried to preserve the blood of all 11 lines in secret vaults scattered across moons of ice, a chapter whose mortal serfs had tattooed the false sigil upon the tongues of newborn children, a chapter whose master had sent 3 offers of parley to Terra and received no answer but extermination, a chapter whose name had been erased so thoroughly that even its sins survived only by implication. They had sworn together. They began to break apart separately. Some still worshipped the false Primarch with the terrible purity of those who had already murdered doubt within themselves. Their chaplains preached that Caribian had been martyrdom, that the Jade Talons had not died but ascended into proof, that the Carcharodons were not loyalists but abyssal mutants sent by jealous lords to hide the returned light. Their warriors burned the dead of Caribian in effigy and carved the final warning into their own armor as a vow of defiance. Others began to suspect manipulation. In sealed strategiums, captains spoke in low voices beneath static fields. They reviewed the earliest days of the war. They compared the false Primarch's words across different campaigns and found contradictions. They examined the way their mortal auxiliaries adored him, the way astropaths broke when carrying his sermons, the way governors changed after meeting him. Some wondered whether they had found a son of the Emperor or a weapon shaped like one. Some wondered whether the oaths they had taken could still be unmade. A few sought to bargain. Their envoys did not reach Terra. The Death Eagles saw to that. There were no open roads left for repentance, no pilgrim routes, no warp corridors unmarked by listening knives. The Death Eagles spread through the void between rebel strongholds and began killing the possibility of movement. Their scout cruisers drifted cold beyond Mandeville points. Their kill teams boarded Chartist vessels, pilgrim hulks, and fleet tenders suspected of carrying coded offers of surrender. Navigators who had served the condemned fleets were dragged from their sanctums, third eyes hooded in lead and sanctified chains. Some tried to claim neutrality by ancient compact. The Death Eagles answered that a route given to traitors was a weapon fired against the throne. They killed them cleanly where time allowed. Where it did not, they vented the sanctums and let the warp take the bodies. Without navigators, retreat became arithmetic instead of hope. Without astropaths, command became guesswork. Without relay stations, pleas became local prayers whispered into armor. The Death Eagles did not merely pursue the enemy, they made distance itself a prison. The Red Talons struck the Forge Moons. They came upon Val Tertius when its manufactoria were still feeding ammunition, replacement armor, plasma coils, and machine-blessed components to 3 of the condemned chapters. The moon had once sworn fealty to Mars and Terra, but its tech-marine conclaves had maintained traitor war gear under sealed logic and warrior privilege, claiming that the machine spirits of Astartes' relics were innocent of their bearers' sins. The Red Talons did not debate the matter. Their bombardment began at the equatorial plasma foundries and moved north by measured increments. Orbital batteries cut the moon open. Lance strikes split manufactorum domes. Macro shells fell into ammunition districts and lifted whole city sectors in blossoming fire. Reactor stacks ruptured. Conveyor cathedrals collapsed into lakes of molten ore. Servitors burned in their thousands, still dragging shell casings toward assembly shrines, while flames ate their augmetics. Forge adepts transmitted surrender codes. The Red Talons ignored them until every known Traitoris Perdita supply vault had been broken. Then they landed. Iron-grey warriors marched through Ashfall with flamers, graviton mauls, melter guns, and execution writs sealed to their breastplates. They found the Techmarine conclave beneath the largest armory, gathered around a crippled land raider whose machine spirit was still singing the battle hymn of a condemned chapter. The Techmarines wore armor marked by old imperial honors and new stains of compromise. They argued duty. They argued sacred obligation to the machine. They argued that no warrior had the right to murder a machine spirit for the betrayal of flesh. The Red Talon's commander listened until their logic had completed itself. Then he ordered them shot. Those who survived the first volley were taken apart by power axes. Servo arms jerked and spasmed as their owners died. Mechadendrites coiled like severed worms across the floor. The Land Raider was opened with melter charges and burned from within. When one Techmarine crawled toward its hull, both legs gone, hands outstretched as though toward a dying brother, a Red Talon sergeant placed a bolt pistol to the back of his skull and ended him before sentiment could become delay. The Charnel Guard made war elsewhere. Their stasis crypts had emptied more fully after Caribian. Ancient companies walked again. Their armor bore the dignity of tombs and the violence of old crusades. Their Fellblade pattern engines descended upon hive bastions that had declared for the returned sun, vast, super-heavy tanks grinding through ash plains beneath funeral banners. Their cannons did not roar like modern guns. They spoke like awakened monuments. At Gathalamor's lesser namesake, a hive world whose upper spires had been rebuilt into a shrine to the false Primarch, the Charnel Guard advanced across a plain of dead manufactoria. Rebel artillery struck them for 7 hours. Shells burst against armor. Plasma fire washed over their lead formations. Mortal defenders cheered whenever smoke swallowed a Fellblade, then fell silent when the ancient engine rolled out the other side, scorched but unbowed, its main cannon turning with the slow patience of a guillotine. When the Fellblades fired, hive bastions became burning rib cages. Entire wall sections folded inward. Gun towers vanished in red-white flashes. Hab blocks behind the defenses tore open, spilling bodies, furniture, icons, and flame into the avenues below. The Charnel Guard advanced through the wreckage like a procession of execution angels, their noble faces hidden behind helms, their voices raised only in low battle cant. They did not rage. They mourned even as they killed, and that made their killing no less complete. While the others broke roots, forges, and bastions, the Carcharodons specialized in absence. Their war was not always announced by explosions. Sometimes a garrison simply vanished. On the moon of Sedain, a rebel armory station failed to answer its scheduled transmission. A patrol vessel docked 3 days later and found the station intact. The guns were loaded, the shields were raised, the mess halls still held half-eaten ration bricks, the chapel candles still burned before the false sigil. But the serfs were gone, the armsmen were gone, the 3 Jade Talon's allies stationed there were gone. Only the armory vault remained open, its floor scored by drag marks and black blood. On the command throne lay a single pauldron plate, the traitor heraldry bitten through by what looked like enormous teeth. At the fortress moon of Odrin's wake, a rebel watchkeep built into an asteroid crust transmitted defiance to the pentarchy and swore that no grey butcher would pass its walls. Its next transmission never came. Weeks later, a Death Eagle's recon vessel found every external defense intact, every void shield generator functional, every hangar door sealed from within. Inside, the corridors were dark. The air had been vented. The command staff had been chained upside down in the strategium and bled dry into the cogitator wells. The Astartes defenders were missing, except for their helms, which had been arranged in a ring around the central hololith. The hololith displayed only deep ocean. Strike cruisers were found empty, not destroyed, not captured in any common sense. Empty. One vessel belonging to a redacted condemned chapter was discovered drifting beyond the Varnak shoals, engines cold, broadside decks unfired. Boarding parties found no bodies in the armories, no crew in the engine shrines, no officers upon the bridge. In the Reclusiam, the false sigil had been scraped from the altar with chain-blade teeth. In the Apothecarian, every progenoid sample had been removed or burned. In the chapter chapel, a bite-marked heraldry plate had been nailed over the lectern with a combat knife driven through its center. The Carcharodons did not claim these acts. They did not need to. Fear did the transmission for them. When the major void battle came, it came above the ruined pilgrim cluster of Orison's Fall. 3 condemned chapter fleets, supported by mortal naval elements and armed shrine hulks, attempted to break through the tightening pentarchy net and reach the inner territories of the false Primarch. They came in strength, hundreds of warships and escort craft, their prows marked with devotional script, their vox channels filled with hymns, their commanders certain that weight of numbers would crush the grey hunters before the others could converge. The Carcharodons met them in the wreck light of dead pilgrims. Battle barges advanced at the heart of the grey formation. Strike cruisers slid along their flanks. Escort squadrons dispersed like predatory fish, vanishing behind wrecked cathedram ships and reappearing at cruel angles. The rebel fleet opened with macro-cannon broadsides, the void between them filling with shell tracks, plasma glare, and debris. Carcharodon shields flared and bled light. Armor plates ruptured. One escort broke in half under lance fire, its crew spilling into the void as burning specks. The grey fleet did not answer at once. It closed. That was when the rebels began to understand. The Carcharodons wanted boarding range. Torpedoes launched in black waves. Boarding claws fired from strike cruisers and bit into rebel hulls like iron jaws. Assault rams drove through gun decks. Breach charges opened corridors to vacuum. Carcharodon kill teams entered enemy ships, while the macro cannon exchange still shook them, turning void war into close murder. On the rebel cruiser, Penitent Crown, Devourer squads fought through 3 decks of armsmen, tore the ship's captain from his command pulpit, and left his body wired to the Voxmast as a jammer. On the battle barge Oath of Radiance, Red Brethren boarded through the port launch bay and advanced toward the Apothecarian, storm bolters firing at chest height until the passageways became tunnels of torn flesh and shattered plate. Outside, macro-cannon broadsides traded death at distances that still felt intimate to ships that large. Plasma drives ruptured like captive suns. A rebel Grand Cruiser took a lance through its reactor spine and bloomed into white fire, its broken halves turning slowly apart, while thousands died in a silence the void refused to carry. A Carcharodon strike cruiser, its prow mangled and bridge exposed, rammed a shrine hulk amidships and continued firing until both vessels vanished in a chain of magazine detonations. The Death Eagles closed the rearward lanes and killed every route of escape. The Red Talons translated in at the rebel flank and applied overwhelming fire to ships already committed. The Charnel Guard arrived last, not late, but at the moment when their broadside batteries would matter most, their ancient guns breaking the central rebel formation apart like bone beneath a hammer. By the end, the Pilgrim cluster was a graveyard twice over. The Carcharodons took prisoners from useful decks. They took armor, codes, charts, serfs, and gene data where it could be stolen before burning. They left the rest to vacuum and fire. Rebel distress calls echoed outward for a little while, then died as Death Eagle's interceptors found them and cut them short. After Orison's fall, the coalition of the false Primarch no longer spoke with one voice. That was when he answered. The broadcast came through every wound the war had opened. It rose from damaged astropathic relays, from dying navigators, from the vox throats of captured serfs, from cracked helm speakers on battlefields still cooling. It entered the strategiums of the pentarchy as gold static and black light. Mortal crewmen dropped to their knees. Some wept, some clawed at their faces. A red talon sergeant shot 2 bridge thralls before their prayers could spread. A flesh-eater's chaplain shattered a vox shrine with his crozius, and still heard the voice within his helm. It was beautiful. That was the worst of it. "My brothers," the voice said. The words carried grief, authority, and warmth enough to make treason seem like homecoming. "My brothers, why do you make yourselves knives in the hands of lesser men?" Across the Carcharodon strategium, serfs collapsed beneath the pressure of it. The Harvester Prime drove a spike into the Vox altar and began bleeding the transmission into sealed capture engines. The Reaper Prime drew his blade. The Red Brethren stood unmoving around the chamber, white helms tilted toward the sound. The Shade Lord listened. His pale face did not change. His black eyes did not lower. The voice rolled through the chamber again, calling them sons of exile, sons of forgotten war, sons cast into darkness by masters too weak to understand the uses of monsters. It offered return. It offered recognition. It offered a place at the side of the one who would cleanse terror of decay and raise mankind beneath a living son's command. The Shade Lord let the silence after the words stretch until it became heavier than the broadcast. Then he leaned toward the Vox altar. "We have no brothers among the condemned." The world had once been called St. Boras. Its proper designation in the tithe ledgers was longer, swollen with ecclesiastical honorifics, crop yield categories, military levy codes, and shrine precedent seals. But the men who died upon it remembered only the short name. St. Boras had been a world of pilgrimage roads and manufactorum cities, a place of incense, grain, steel, and bells. Its continents were veined with processional highways wide enough for armored columns. Its oceans were shallow and grey. Its hive stacks rose around cathedral districts like beggars huddled around fires. For 7,000 years it had sent men, food, promethium, shells, hymnals, censers, corpse starch, prayer books, and bone reliquaries into the greater hunger of the imperium. Then it had learned to pray wrong. From orbit, the corruption was not immediately visible. The great cathedrals still bore the aquila upon their domes. The basilica towers still burned with votive lumen fires. The manufactoria still displayed the cog and skull of sacred industry. The planetary defense regiments still marched in block formations beneath banners that claimed service to the master of mankind. Choir signals still carried hymns in high Gothic. Every outward ritual remained obedient enough to make a weak commander hesitate. The pentarchy did not hesitate. The first close auger sweeps revealed the truth carved into stone, enamel, pigment, glass, iron, and flesh. Across the cathedral facades, the emperor still sat enthroned, but he had been placed behind another figure. In stained glass, a radiant giant in gold and black armor stood before the throne, one hand raised in benediction, while the emperor's own image bowed its crowned head in shadow. In mosaics, the master of mankind was shown not as Lord of humanity, but as witness to the returned sun. On chapel doors, the aquila's twin heads had been turned inward toward the crowned wound of light. Children in Hab schools had been taught to draw the false sigil before they could write their own names. Workers pressed devotional brands against their tongues before entering manufactorum shifts. Priests proclaimed that terror had grown old and the son had returned to speak what the father could no longer say. It was not merely a rebellious world. It was a world remade as a memory engine. The High Lord's edict left no room for reclamation. St. Boras was not to be liberated. Its people were not to be corrected. Its cathedrals were not to be reconsecrated. Its manufactoria were not to be returned to tithe service. The world had become a vessel for a heresy that fed upon loyalty, using the language of the imperium to poison the imperium's blood. It would be made incapable of producing soldiers, ships, prayers, records, or memory. The mortal armies landed first. They came in numbers so vast that the first waves were still dying, while later waves were being loaded into troop landers above the night side. Imperial army formations descended through flak storms in coffin transports, their hulls shaking apart under anti-orbital fire. Regiments descended from old solar auxilia traditions marched from armored landers in lacquered void plate and sealed helms, their banners snapping beneath ash rain. Siege cohorts rolled from lander bays with heavy tanks, artillery crawlers, bombards, and ammunition haulers. Penal battalions were driven into the outer kill zones with explosive collars and lash servitors. Preachers shouted from vox pulpits mounted upon chimera hulls, promising forgiveness to men already walking into guns. The planetary defense network answered with discipline. St. Boras had prepared for judgment. Its bastions were hidden beneath shrine districts and granary domes. Defense lasers rose from chapel floors. Missile silos opened beneath statue gardens. Macro batteries disguised as bell towers fired through stained glass images of the false Primarch. The first loyalist landing fields became red mud beneath overlapping artillery. Men burned inside transports before ramps fell. Companies advanced into streets lined with devotional loudspeakers and were torn apart by heavy stubber fire from hab windows. Tanks ground forward over bodies until mines lifted them in flame. Medici stations were hit by rockets guided through the screams of captured astropaths. Still, the mortal armies advanced, because the pentarchy required the guns to look downward. The Carcharodons moved among the rear formations like punishment given armor. They did not inspire the mortal troops. They did not raise swords and speak of glory. They did not stand upon command tanks beneath bright banners. Grey giants appeared at the edges of retreat routes, at broken causeways, behind collapsed trench lines, inside smoke-choked field chapels where officers whispered of withdrawal. Their white helms turned toward men who had begun to run. Their black lenses reflected panic without sharing it. At the Carcharodon processional, an entire battalion broke after 3 hours under basilica guns. Men fled through a drainage culvert, dragging wounded comrades, throwing aside packs, some still clutching laser guns, some with hands over their ears as the false hymns shrieked from the towers. A colonel tried to rally them, but his voice broke when he saw the Carcharodons waiting at the culvert mouth. The Shade Lord was not present. He did not need to be. A Reaper Prime stepped forward, took the colonel's abandoned command baton from the mud, and looked at the fleeing men. No speech came, no sermon, no threat. He fired once. The colonel's skull vanished in a burst of bone and cap fragments. The nearest officers froze. The Reaper Prime pointed the bloody baton back toward the front. The battalion returned to the guns. Those who hesitated were shot. The line held. Across St. Boras, that was how obedience was restored. Not by hope, not by faith, by fear sharpened until it cut in the correct direction. The flesh-eaters entered the cathedral districts when the outer walls were breached. They came through doors large enough for titans to kneel beneath, their armor already blackened by soot and streaked with gore. Chaplains strode among them, Crozius heads glowing, voices hammering restraint, litanies over the vox. The cathedrals had become fortresses, packed with militia, almsmen, false priests, oath-bound nobles, and fanatics whose bodies were wrapped in prayer strips bearing the wrong name. They stood beneath the aquila and screamed devotion to the radiant sun. The flesh-eaters answered with chain blades. Within the Basilica of the Sevenfold Martyr, the first nave became a slaughterhouse. Militia fired from confession balconies. Heavy weapons teams nested among saint statues. Priests carried censers filled with nerve smoke and tried to bless the attackers with corruption. The flesh-eaters crossed the marble floor under fire, their assault squads leaping through incense haze, chainswords revving, bolt pistols barking. Bodies burst against pews. False priests were torn from pulpits. A red armored warrior caught a burning banner in one gauntlet, dragged its bearer close, and cut him apart, before the cloth touched the floor. But the hunger moved in them. It could be felt even over Vox discipline, the growl beneath the prayers, the fraction of a second too long spent over the fallen, the way some warriors pursued fleeing defenders beyond ordered limits, vanishing into side chapels from which screams returned wet and prolonged. Their chaplains followed with brutal urgency, striking helms, dragging brothers back by armor collars, roaring the names of Sanguinius and the Emperor, until the assault companies remembered the shape of command. The flesh-eaters cleared the cathedrals, but each cathedral paid for that clearing in rivers. The charnel guard advanced along the corpse-choked processional roads. Their coming was slower and more terrible. Ancient armor columns rolled between statues of saints whose faces had been recarved into the likeness of the false Primarch. Fellblade engines crushed barricades, pilgrim carts, militia guns, and dead men into the same red paste beneath their tracks. Their main cannons spoke, and traitor tanks disappeared in incandescent ruin. A Baneblade bearing the false sigil tried to hold the Avenue of Thousand Knees. Its first shot struck the lead Fellblade and wreathed it in fire. When the smoke cleared, the ancient engine continued forward, armor scorched, cannon already aligned. Its reply punched through the Baneblade's glacis and turned the command compartment into a furnace. The traitor tank veered, struck a statue plinth, and died with its crew hammering against sealed hatches. The charnel guard infantry followed like funeral statues given breath. Crimson and boneplate, relic blades, volkite beams that reduced mobs to ash shadows, bolters firing in disciplined patterns through crowds of fanatics. They did not curse the world. They did not mock its devotion. Their silence felt almost sorrowful, but they gave that sorrow no mercy. Where mobs charged with icons of the kneeling emperor, they were burned. Where priests begged to explain the doctrine of the returned sun, they were executed. Where manufacturing workers raised their hands and claimed they had only repeated what they were taught, they were marked, sorted, and sent under guard toward holding pits or death trenches according to usefulness and contamination. The Carcharodons did not care for the surface war, except as pressure. Their true target lay beneath the planetary basilica. The basilica was the largest structure on St. Boras, a continent of black marble, adamantium ribs, gold leaf, reliquary towers, furnace shrines, and prayer engines. It had taken 4,000 years to build. Its bells were made from the melted weapons of martyrs. Its foundations pierced the crust. Beneath its public crypts, beneath the saint vaults, beneath the ossuary rivers and penitent cells, the Harvester Prime found the hidden program, aspirant harvesting. The files had been buried under devotional encryption and apothecarian cipher. The false Primarch's loyal chapters had not merely used St. Boras as a shrine, they had used it as a net. Across the world, boys of strength, aggression, endurance, and genetic promise had been taken from scholar yards, noble houses, underhive fighting pits, work gangs, and pilgrim orphanages. Some had been offered as holy tribute by their families. Some had been seized in night processions. Some had volunteered after seeing the radiant giant in cathedral glass and hearing that the returned sun needed new angels. They were brought beneath the basilica. The Carcharodons entered through a sewage artery older than the planetary governor's bloodline. Devourer squads moved through tunnels thick with rot, chemical runoff, and bone dust. They killed silent servitors at maintenance shrines. They severed picked feeds. They passed beneath sanctified foundations, while above them millions died in the open streets to make their approach unseen. The hidden facility was vast. Training cages lined the first halls. Indoctrination theaters filled the second. Medical vaults waited beyond. The walls were covered not with ordinary imperial catechism, but with images of the false Primarch standing over kneeling worlds. Boys in grey novice tunics stood in ranks before projection shrines, heads shaved, eyes glassy from hypno-instruction. Some were scarred from trials. Some bore surgical marks. Some held wooden practice blades. Some recited oaths in voices not yet deep enough to carry the weight of them. The Carcharodons halted only long enough to assess. Jade Talon's apothecaries and redacted chapter sergeants guarded the deeper vaults. They fought with the fury of men protecting the future rather than their own lives. The first apothecary triggered defense turrets concealed in saint statues and filled the corridor with bolt fire. A devourer lost an arm at the shoulder and kept moving until a second burst opened his helm. His squad killed the turrets with crack grenades and tore the apothecary apart before he could destroy his data core. In the indoctrination hall, a condemned chapter veteran stood before the ranks of aspirants and drew his chainsword. "Children of the returned sun," he shouted, "behold the murderers of your destiny." The boys turned as one. Some reached for practice weapons. Some began to chant. Some stared at the Carcharodons with hatred carefully planted in them by months of false prayer and hypno-command. The Shade Lord entered after the first exchange of fire had ended. His armor was wet with tunnel filth and black blood. His pale face was bare, his helm carried by a serf behind him. The boys looked at him. He looked back at them and saw not children, not recruits, not innocents waiting to be saved, but vessels already carved for a corrupted inheritance, a future army, 1,000 little mouths that would remember the wrong prayer, 1,000 possible hands to carry gene seeds stolen from condemned lines, 1,000 seeds in poisoned soil. The Harvester Prime stood beside him. "Some may be salvageable," he said, "with mind cleansing, isolation, hypno-erasure, tithe conditioning." The Shade Lord watched the boys. One of them spat at his boots and whispered the forbidden title of the false Primarch. The Shade Lord's expression did not move. "No." The Harvester Prime inclined his head. Above them, the basilica shook as charnel guard cannons opened a breach through the western transept. Dust fell from the hidden ceiling. The boys began to chant louder, their young voices rising in perfect unison, repeating the catechism that had replaced the Emperor with his false son. The Shade Lord gave the order, not in anger, not in triumph, not with cruelty, as mortals understood cruelty, with the emptiness of a blade descending because the hand has already chosen. "Burn the root!" The Carcharodons withdrew from the hall and sealed the blast doors. Promethium flooded the lower vaults. Phosphex charges were set in the apothecarian chambers, the gene preparation theatres, the hypno-vaults, the surgical decks, and the aspirant dormitoria. The Harvester Prime took the records required to find other nests. Then the facility was given to white-green fire. The narration of the archive would later omit the sounds, not from pity, from classification necessity. When the planetary basilica's foundations cracked, the bells of St. Boras began to ring. They rang without hands upon the ropes, shaken by bombardment, fire, and the death of the machines beneath them. Their voices rolled across the burning capital, across corpse-filled avenues, across hive districts where the last defense militias fought among manufactorum stacks, across cathedrals where the flesh-eaters were still being dragged back from the edge of frenzy, across roads where charnel guard tanks advanced through ash, across trenches where mortal soldiers looked upward and saw the sky fill with falling light. Orbital fire began. The first lances struck the shipyards. The second wave struck the manufactoria. Macro shells fell into cathedral districts, void docks, granary continents, armory towns, pilgrim archives, scholar complexes, and data monasteries. The planet's atmosphere lit from within. Cities became furnace blooms. Oceans steamed along the coasts. The great basilica collapsed into its own burning foundations, and its wrong prayers died beneath falling stone. St. Boras had prayed with billions of mouths. By dawn, most were ash, silence, or data too vast and obscene for ordinary record. In the sealed archive beneath Terra, the death toll was not written in full. The numbers exceeded permitted display thresholds for a single compliance action and were compressed into black cipher blocks beneath the classification mark of Traitoris Perdita. The savants who later attempted expansion went mad, blind, or silent before the total resolved. Thus the record did not say how many died. It said only that the world had been made incapable of memory. The rebel keep had been broken before sunrise, though the world beneath it had never known a true dawn. It stood upon a moon of frozen ash, half buried in the ejecta plains of a dead volcanic range, its walls carved into black basalt and plated with old ceramite taken from imperial armories before the fall. Once it had been a watch fortress sworn to guard a warp approach, a place of austere duty where serfs learned silence and neophytes were hardened under the eyes of gene-wrought masters. When the false Primarch's voice reached it, the keep had changed without changing shape. Its guns still bore imperial kill marks. Its chapels still smelled of incense and weapon oil. Its gates still displayed the aquila, but beneath that sacred sign, another mark had been burned into the stone, deeper, newer, hungrier. By the time the Carcharodons entered its inner court, the banners had stopped moving. They hung in rags from cracked spires, their green, black, crimson and bone heraldry so defaced by fire and bolter impacts that only fragments of condemned identity remained. The keep's outer bastions had been reduced to teeth of melted metal. Its armory vaults burned beneath the southern wall. Its dreadnought chapel had collapsed into a pit full of sarcophagus fragments and burning amniotic fluid. Frost mixed with ash across the courtyard, and where blood fell, it steamed for a moment before freezing black. The final defenders had died hard. That had not saved them. Devourer squads moved through the remains of the gatehouse, with chain blades idling at their sides. Red Brethren Terminators stood at the mouths of breached corridors, their armor gouged, their storm bolters still smoking. Mortal armsmen who had survived the last assault lay on the ground, with their hands wired behind their backs. Some shivered from cold, some shook from wounds, some whispered prayers to the wrong master until Carcharodon serfs came among them with iron rods and ended the noise. There was no shouting. That was what made it worse. No triumphal roar came from the grey warriors. No insult was cast upon the fallen. No sermon declared the justice of the slaughter. The Carcharodons worked in silence, broken only by vox clicks, boot falls, chain drag, the crackle of fires, and the occasional short bark of a bolter when something still alive was judged not worth transport. This was their cruelty in its purest shape. Not rage, not delight, not the red hunger of berserkers or the iron hatred of machine-hearted executioners. Utility. The dead keep became a sorting ground. The Carcharodons had brought hooks, chains, branding irons, restraint collars, spinal clamps, gene gauges, cranial scanners, prayer locks, and long black lists etched into brass tablets. Their void serfs moved in ordered lines behind the warriors, bent-backed men with shaved heads and branded cheeks, dragging carts, cages, stretchers, and body sledges. Servo skulls hovered over the prisoners, lenses clicking, needle arrays tasting blood, skin, breath, and fear. Every survivor was measured against use. Useful hands went to the holds. Laborers who had maintained reactors, loaded shells, repaired bulkhead seals, or scrubbed plasma ducts were marked with grey wax and iron tags. They would live, though no one mistook that for mercy. They would be chained into the lower decks of Carcharodon ships and spend the rest of their numbered breaths hauling ammunition, cleaning blood from armor joints, rendering fat for corpse starch, or dying in the dark beneath engines that did not know their names. Condemned armsmen went into a second line. Those with training, discipline, and no immediate sign of warp taint were stripped, scanned, branded, and shackled. Their unit officers were separated. Their loyalty tattoos were cut from their skin, where they bore the false sigil. Those who screamed too loudly were gagged. Those who resisted were hamstrung and dragged. They would become expendable boarding thralls, ammunition carriers, shield-bearers, and breech labor in wars where even death would have to be earned by usefulness. Officers went to the execution pits. The pits had been dug through frozen ash at the edge of the courtyard. No rites were spoken there. A man was brought forward, identified by rank, questioned once for names, then forced to kneel. A bolt pistol spoke. Another man was dragged forward, then another. Their bodies were pushed into the pit by chain hafts and boot soles. When the pit filled, promethium was poured over the heap and lit. The flames burned blue in the thin air, crawling across medals, uniforms, hair, skin, and the false devotional brands pressed into their tongues. Failed aspirants went to the incinerators. They were boys and young men with swollen surgical scars, half-implanted organs, ruined immune systems, and minds mutilated by hypno-doctrine. Some were too far along the condemned path to be mortal, not far enough along to be Astartes, and useless to any future, except as a warning. They were examined by the Harvester Prime's attendants, with cold instruments and colder eyes. Those judged salvageable were taken away under restraint, their minds destined for breaking and remaking in the void. Those judged failed were marked with black ash and led into the furnace tunnels beneath the keep's manufactorum wing. The doors closed. The furnaces woke. The screaming lasted less time than the prayers that had made them what they were. Wounded Astartes went elsewhere. They were not granted the dignity of the pits. They were too valuable for immediate death and too condemned for honor. The Carcharodons dragged them from rubble, from collapsed chapels, from under broken tanks, from the ruins of the apothecarian. Some had lost limbs. Some had cracked helms filled with blood. Some still tried to fight while their bodies failed, spitting oaths, curses, and the title of the false Primarch through shattered teeth. They were pinned to interrogation slabs with adamantium spikes, their armor cut away piece by piece, their black carapace exposed beneath surgical lamps. The Harvester Prime passed among them like a butcher priest of some abyssal cult. Gene line status. Contamination probable. Command knowledge. Extract. Pain threshold. Irrelevant. A loyalist inquisitorial observer watched from the shadow of a broken arch. He had been attached to the pentarchy by sealed authority of terror, a thin man in black carapace beneath a fur-lined stormcoat, his face narrow, his scalp marked with purity script. His name had been entered into the campaign rolls and then immediately placed under conditional erasure, for no man observing the pentarchy could be certain of surviving either the enemy or his allies. He had seen cyclonic burnings, heretic pyres, witch purges, and naval mutiny suppressions. Yet the work of the Carcharodons unsettled him because it lacked heat. They did not hate enough. They did not rejoice enough. They processed damnation as if it were awe. He approached a Reaper Prime as another line of prisoners was driven past. None of these should live, the inquisitorial observer said. Every servant of the false Primarch carries infection. Every tongue here has repeated his lies. Every hand has loaded his guns. Burn them all and be done. The Reaper Prime turned his skull-white helm toward the man. For several breaths, there was only the wind moving ash across the courtyard. Then the Reaper Prime answered, "The dead serve once, the chained serve until spent." The observer's mouth tightened. That is not absolution. No. Nor justice. No. What then? The Reaper Prime looked back to the sorting lines. Tithe. The word ended the exchange. Near the shattered reclusiam, the captured rebel chaplain was brought out in chains. He had survived beneath the collapsed pulpit, where he had preached the returned son's truth while the keep fell around him. His black armor was cracked, his Crozius arm gone at the elbow, his helm split open to reveal a face marked by ash, old scars, and fresh blood. His remaining eye burned with hatred bright enough to resemble faith. He was dragged by 4 void serfs. Though even wounded, he killed one before a Carcharodon broke both his legs with a thunderhammer haft. They chained him upright to a reliquary column stripped of its icons. The Shade Lord did not attend him. The pale nomad did. He was an ancient Carcharodon, not named aloud by the serfs, his armor marked with exile glyphs and old abyssal trophies. Shark teeth hung from cords at his belt. His face was bare, pale as drowned flesh, eyes black and unreadable. He stood before the rebel chaplain while the keep was emptied around them. The chaplain spat blood onto the ash between them. "You wear the Emperor's colors as carrion beasts wear skin," he rasped. "You call this loyalty? Chains, brands, children burned in furnaces, men taken into the dark to die in your holds? You are not angels. You are not sons. You are monsters kept beyond the edge of the map, because even terror is ashamed to name you." The pale nomad regarded him. The chaplain laughed, and the laugh became a wet cough. "Say something, Butcher. Defend your savagery. Tell me how this serves your corpse masters." The pale nomad stepped closer. "Monsters," he said softly, "are what the imperium throws into waters too black for saints." The chaplain stared at him. For the first time, hatred flickered towards something like understanding. Then the Harvester Prime's attendants came with memory hooks, and the chaplain's defiance became screaming. Beyond the keep, Red Talon's officers observed the tithe process with iron distaste. They respected its efficiency. No body was wasted if it could labor. No prisoner remained unclassified. No armor plate, bolt shell, gene sample, machine core, chart, or oath token escaped audit. The Red Talons could appreciate the ruthless economy of it. Yet the silence of the Carcharodons troubled even them. The sons of Ferrus Manus preferred hatred declared openly, weakness named, judgment pronounced, destruction made clear in the language of iron. The Carcharodons worked like deep pressure. They did not need to despise. They simply consumed. A Red Talon centurion watched a train of chained laborers being driven into a landing craft. "They make servitude look like a digestive act," he voxed. His commander answered after a moment. "Efficiency remains efficiency." "Would you fight beside them again?" "Yes." A pause. "Would you turn your back to them?" "No." The Death Eagles found the clue beneath the keep's librarious annex. It was not in a data vault, nor in an astropathic shrine, nor in the command pulpit. It lived inside men. The prisoners were mortal, all of them inner household staff of the rebel chapter, chamberlains, vox stewards, pilgrimage route keepers, one former chart scribe whose hands had been surgically fused into a portable cipher engine. Their conscious minds knew little. Under questioning, they recited only approved responses, devotional phrases, false memories, and nonsense coordinates that led into empty void. But Death Eagle's interrogation cadres detected the pattern beneath the failure. Their memories had been cut, folded, sealed, and buried under layers of psychosurgery. Someone had hidden the route to the inner sanctum of the false Primarch inside them, not as data, as trauma. The Death Eagle's captain reported to the Shade Lord in the stripped strategium, where the rebel keep's own hololith now displayed the tightening noose across the segmentum. "Extraction by conventional means will destroy the subjects before recovery," he said. "The memory architecture is trapped. We can attempt surgical unsealing, but success probability is low, and delay increases enemy withdrawal options." The Shade Lord looked to the librarian standing in the gloom behind the hololith. The Carcharodon Psyker wore grey armor inscribed with warding marks, his hooded helm hanging from one hand, his shaven scalp pale beneath tattooed lines of exile script.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
His eyes were black like the others, but something moved far behind them, something that had stared into the warp and learned to stare back without prayer. "Take it," the Shade Lord said. The prisoners were brought to the apothecarian ruin and chained in a circle around a broken mosaic of the Emperor. The librarian entered the circle alone. No chanting accompanied him, no incense, no comforting fiction of healing. His force staff struck the stone once. The air tightened. The prisoners began to breathe too fast. One of them begged before the power touched him. Another bit through his own tongue. A third stared at nothing and smiled. Then the librarian opened their memories. He did not unlock them gently. He tore. The first prisoner died with blood pouring from his eyes, nose, and ears, his skull cracking under pressure from within. The second screamed in the voice of a child, though he was an old man. The third vomited black bile and fragments of surgical wire. The fourth spoke in 3 voices at once, naming stars that did not appear on loyal charts. The fifth tried to pray to the false Primarch, but the prayer unraveled into coordinates, fleet passwords, approach vectors, shrine names, orbital defense canticles, and the image of a system wrapped in stolen holiness. The librarian pulled harder. Men died around him. Their minds came apart like wet parchment in a fist. Memories spilled in fragments. A golden black figure standing beneath a ringed sun. 11 banners before a throne of reliquaries. A pilgrim fleet converted into orbital shields. Shrine worlds chained by void docks. Astropathic choirs buried beneath moons. A war palace built across multiple planets, each world serving as altar, armory, choir, and shield. No single throne world, no one citadel to strike, an entire system made into a cathedral of rebellion. When the librarian finished, most of the prisoners were dead. The survivors remained breathing, but nothing human looked out through their eyes. They drooled. They rocked. One laughed soundlessly until a serf gagged him. Another stared at his own hands as though they belonged to a stranger. Their minds had been emptied in service to the hunt. The Death Eagle's captain examined the recovered projection. His expression did not change, but the silence around him sharpened. The Red Talon's commander received the same data and began calculating fleet losses without comment. The Charnel Guard Lord made the sign of the Aquila and whispered that the enemy had built blasphemy at a scale fit for old night. The Flesh-Eater's Reclusiarch asked only when they would be released. The Shade Lord stood before the hololithic reconstruction as the stolen memories resolved into stars, moons, battle stations, shrine worlds, pilgrim shields, defense crowns, warp approaches, and the innermost palace of the false Primarch. The coordinates glowed red in the dim chamber. Around them, the corpse of the rebel keep cooled in the moon's black wind, while tithe craft rose one after another toward the waiting grey fleet, their holds full of chained survivors and stolen utility. The false Primarch's sanctum had been found. It was not one planet. It was an entire fortified system, built from stolen imperial faith. The war ceased being a hunt when the condemned chapters chose to gather their teeth. Until then, the pentarchy had cut, burned, drowned, and silenced in separated theaters, each action a wound placed where it would bleed deepest. Relay fortresses died before chapter keeps. Forge moons were reduced before fleet reserves could refit. Shrine worlds were crushed before they could breed new faith. The Jade Talons had been broken beneath stormwater. St. Boras had been erased beneath orbital fire. Garrison moons and hidden keeps had vanished into the holds of the Carcharodons or into ash. The net had tightened around the coordinates torn from the minds of the condemned. The false Primarch's inner system lay ahead, a cathedral of worlds and weapons built from stolen imperial devotion. Between the pentarchy and that blasphemous heart, the rebels made their stand. They came not as scattered warbands, nor as isolated oathbreakers fleeing extinction, but as a combined counter-offensive vast enough to stain the void. Hundreds of capital ships and lesser vessels translated from multiple approach vectors, their hulls marked with altered aquilas and the crowned wound of the returned sun. Battle barges bore old honor scrolls defaced by new scripture. Strike cruisers advanced in tight formation beside troop hulks swollen with mortal auxiliaries. Pilgrim ships had been armored with slab plating and chained gun decks. Forge tenders dragged ammunition cathedrals through the void. Shrine arcs carried millions of zealots packed into prayer cages, each man, woman, and child chanting the forbidden title with bleeding mouths. Below them moved armies. Billions of mortal soldiers had been raised from corrupted tithe worlds, shrine continents, penal colonies turned holy by treason, and hive districts where children learned the false Primarch's name before they learned hunger. Armored regiments rolled beneath banners of gold and black. Militia hosts filled trenches from horizon to horizon. Gun lines crossed continents. The skies of contested worlds darkened beneath aircraft, dropcraft, missile wakes, ash storms, and the shadows of ships burning in orbit. Every theater became a part of one immense machine of slaughter. The Red Talons took command of the macro war. No one disputed it. The Sons of Iron had been built for such arithmetic. Their commander stood in the strategium of his flagship, surrounded by hololithic projections large enough to make star systems seem like wounds on a surgical table. His officers spoke in clipped data bursts. Loss projections crawled across glass panes. Enemy vectors were reduced to angles, mass, velocity, probable morale thresholds, ammunition states, and sacrifice value. To the Red Talons, the rebellion was no longer a collection of warriors with names. It was a structure of force awaiting collapse. Their calculus was simple. Let the enemy see weakness. Let him believe his courage has been rewarded. Let him commit, then erase him without restraint. A loyalist flank was deliberately thinned near the broken moonbelt of Corvain. Red Talon's escorts withdrew in apparent disorder, their drive flares stuttering, their formations opening gaps wide enough to invite pursuit. The rebel admirals saw what they wanted to see. They believed the pentarchy had overextended, believed the Carcharodons and Death Eagles had advanced too far ahead, believed the Charnel Guard were too slow, and the Flesh Eaters too uncontrolled. Condemned chapter captains ordered their spearhead forward, supported by mortal naval squadrons and troop hulks full of assault armies meant to break through the loyalist line and fall upon the pentarchy rear. The Red Talons allowed the mistake to deepen. They seeded void. They bled escorts. They let rebel ships close until their augurs filled with apparent victory. Then the false flank became a killing geometry. Hidden batteries mounted inside dead asteroids woke and fired. Red Talon's battle barges turned with impossible coordination, presenting full broadsides. Lance strikes descended from high polar positions, where strike cruisers had waited in silent occlusion behind radiation storms. Macro cannon shells crossed the void in overlapping fields, each salvo calculated to drive enemy vessels into the next. The rebel spearhead did not break at first. It died while still advancing, its captains refusing to believe that success had become a trap until their ships were already opening from keel to spine. The Death Eagles made the retreat corridor. They had shaped it before the battle began, marking a path through the moonbelt where augur interference suggested escape. It appeared imperfect, but plausible, just dangerous enough to seem real. Rebel fleet masters, seeing their spearhead shredded by Red Talon's fire, turned toward it with desperate discipline. Capital ships burned hard for the corridor. Escorts gathered around troop hulks. Damaged strike cruisers vented atmosphere and blood, but still fled under forced acceleration. The corridor welcomed them. Then it closed its teeth. Minds woke from cold drift, their machine spirits silent until the last moment. They detonated beneath prows, along flanks, inside void shield envelopes weakened by prior impacts. Lance batteries hidden in hollow moons fired through predetermined channels. Death Eagle's destroyers slid from debris shadows and struck engines, bridges, augur spines, and navigator sanctums. They did not seek glorious kills. They removed movement. They removed sight. They removed command. Rebel ships collided in panic, their helms blinded, their drives damaged, their communications choked by jamming hymns and static knives. One battle barge bearing the scarred heraldry of a redacted condemned chapter tried to force passage through the minefield, shields flaring like a dying aurora. A Death Eagle strike cruiser,
placed a lance through its lower
spine. A second lance opened its reactor chapel. The barge split slowly, its decks peeling apart, its internal cathedrals exposed to vacuum. Thousands were drawn out into the void, still clutching weapons, still mouthing prayers that no air remained to carry. Below the Void War, the Charnel Guard proved that their relics were not ceremonial. On the world of Belisar's ash, where rebel armies had fortified a chain of hive bastions across a dead salt sea, the Charnel Guard descended beneath storm clouds stained red by orbital fires. Their landing craft bore ancient heraldry and opened like tomb doors. From them came armor older than many planetary bloodlines. Fellblade engines rolled down onto the salt flats, tracks crushing bones from previous wars into powder. Sikaran tanks followed, their guns slewing with predatory grace. Relic aircraft screamed overhead, black-winged shapes carrying Volkite, Lars, missile, and flame. The rebel bastions opened fire. Earthshaker shells walked across the salt flats. Plasma batteries burned trenches into the advancing lines. Super-heavy traitor armor moved from concealed revetments, their hulls painted with devotional murals of the false Primarch standing above a kneeling emperor. Mortal armies cheered from the walls, believing ancient beauty must break beneath sufficient fire. The Charnel Guard did not break. Their fell blades fired. The first bastion collapsed inward, its upper guns vanishing in a white glare. The second was struck through its central gate, the shell passing through armor, ferrocrete, men, shrines, ammunition lifts, and command vault, before detonating beneath the Basilica Tower. The hive wall rose, cracked, and fell in pieces the size of hab blocks. Relic aircraft descended through flak and turned defensive trenches into boiling lines of ash. Volkite beams passed through mobs and left only blackened impressions against stone. Charnel Guard infantry advanced behind the armor, their motions solemn, their bolters disciplined, their blades drawn only when the dying became close enough to touch. Where the Red Talons destroyed armies and the Death Eagles removed escape, the Charnel Guard crushed strongpoints as if performing burial rites for civilizations. The Flesh Eaters took the troop hulks. There were too many to destroy from the outside without wasting the momentum of the kill. They were vast, ugly vessels, pilgrim carcasses reinforced with armor, their holds packed with mortal auxiliaries, fanatic shock troops, and reserve companies from the condemned lines. The Flesh Eaters boarded them in waves. Assault rams punched through hull plating, boarding claws locked, breach charges blew corridors into fire and vacuum. Then Red Warriors entered, and the hulks became slaughter vaults. Room by room, deck by deck, barricade by barricade, the Flesh Eaters tore the morale out of the enemy. Their chaplains chanted over the vox with voices raw from restraint. Litanies of wrath, litanies of control, litanies of Sanguinius, the Emperor, and the necessity of obedience over appetite. Behind those voices came the chain-blade scream. Mortal auxiliaries fired from behind cargo crates, shrine walls, ammunition pallets, and overturned coffins. The Flesh Eaters hit the barricades like living breaches. Chainswords carved through bodies and the cover behind them. Eviscerators split men in clusters. Bolt pistols detonated heads at arm's length. Grenades rolled into prayer circles and turned chanting mobs into slick red ruin. A condemned Astartes squad held the central spine of the Hulk, Grief of Dawn. Green, black, and bone-white armor locked shield to shield before a reliquary elevator. They shouted for the returned sun and challenged the Flesh Eaters to meet them as warriors. The Flesh Eaters answered by flooding the corridor with smoke, sending assault marines through ventilation shafts, and hitting the shield line from above, behind, and ahead at once. Honor dissolved into hacking, biting close war. A chaplain crushed one traitor's helm with his Crozius, then dragged a Flesh Eater back by the gorget when the warrior bent too long over the fallen. "Remember command," the chaplain snarled. The warrior shook, blood running from his grill. "I remember." "Then kill forward." The warrior rose and obeyed. The Carcharodons did not seek the thickest fighting. They sought the future. While the great formations clashed and burned, grey kill teams entered. Command spaces, gene vaults, apothecarian decks, librarius nodes, fleetmaster sanctums, astropathic chambers, and surf officer quarters. They killed continuity before they killed line strength. A rebel company could survive without its front rank. It could not survive without its apothecaries, its records, its shipmasters, its navigators, its aspirant registries, its serf clans trained to maintain armor, its librarians carrying hidden routes through the warp, its chaplains preserving the corrupted oath. On the strike cruiser crowned in ash, the Carcharodons ignored a line company mustering in the assault bay, and instead cut through 3 maintenance decks to reach the apothecarian. The enemy realized too late. By the time their warriors reached the vault, the Harvester Prime had already broken the progenoid caskets, taken what intelligence could be used, and ordered phosphex released across the storage racks. Apothecaries fought with narthethium blades and bolt pistols, but the Devourers gave them no duels. They shot limbs, crushed hands, hacked through surgical rigs, and left white armored bodies burning beside the organs they had tried to preserve. On another vessel, a Carcharodon librarian found 3 rebel psychers bound into a choir cradle, their minds shielded behind false light. He did not debate them in the warp. He collapsed the cradle's warding field and let the backlash pulp their brains inside their skulls. Their last psychic scream killed every mortal in the chamber. The Carcharodon walked out alone, carrying the codes they had died protecting. On a fortified moon below, surf officers attempted to evacuate aspirant stock through underground mag rail tunnels. The Carcharodons flooded the tunnels with rad smoke, sealed both ends, and waited until the life signs weakened. Then they entered with knives, scanners, and brands. Useful bodies went to chains. Failed stock went to flame. Records went to the Harvester. The rest went into silence. Thus the pentarchy fought as 5 different sentences of the same judgment. The Red Talons destroyed armies. The Death Eagles removed escape. The Flesh Eaters ruptured morale. The Charnel Guard crushed strongpoints. The Carcharodons erased futures. The rebels understood too late that they were not facing a crusade. A crusade could be delayed, diverted, bled, shamed, or negotiated with if the cost became high enough. This was an execution machine, each chapter built into a function, each function supporting the next, each victory designed not to gain territory, but to reduce the condemned capacity to exist. Then came the reversal. The moon fortress of Calix Mortua had been marked as crippled. It orbited a gas giant at the edge of the battle zone, its defense batteries silenced, its shields failing, its surface split by bombardment. Loyalist fleet elements moved in to secure it, supported by Imperial army transports carrying occupation troops, Mechanicum salvage craft, Red Talons escorts, and several lesser vessels whose crews believed the fortress had spent its last fury. The condemned chapter within had not spent anything. It had saved itself for death. Deep beneath the moon's crust, its tech marines and surf reactor cults overloaded the plasma core, the ammunition vaults, the grav stabilizers, and the ancient engines that had once moved the fortress into orbit. They chained their wounded to gun thrones. They sealed their mortal auxiliaries into the inner chapels. They broadcast a final hymn to the false Primarch, not asking rescue, not asking forgiveness, but offering annihilation as proof of devotion. The Death Eagles detected the energy spike moments before detonation. Too late. Calix Mortua became a sun. The moon fortress burst outward in a sphere of white and red fury. Its crust shattered into molten continents. Plasma fire washed across nearby void lanes. Loyalist escorts vanished whole. Imperial troop ships were opened like tin reliquaries, spilling burning regiments into the blast. A Red Talons cruiser took the shock across its flank and broke apart, its engine section spinning into a transport flotilla and killing tens of thousands more. Mechanicum salvage craft disappeared beneath a cloud of ammunition detonations. Void shields flared, failed, and died across the Loyalist formation. For the first time in the campaign, the pentarchy line recoiled. The rebels cheered across every channel they still possessed. They had proved they would die as martyrs. They had proved they would murder worlds, fleets, and themselves rather than yield the road. They had proved that the closer the pentarchy came to the inner system, the less value survival held for the condemned. In the strategium of the Carcharodon flagship, the hololith flickered with casualty runes. The Shade Lord watched the destruction without visible reaction. Around him, the Harvester Prime adjusted data strings. The Reaper Prime stood with his blade drawn, point resting against the deck. Red Brethren waited at the chamber's edge, silent as submerged idols. The false broadcast chatter of rebel triumph crawled across the voxnets, thin and exultant, before Death Eagle's jamming began to crush it. The Red Talon's commander demanded immediate reprisal against every remaining fortress body in range. The Death Eagles advised full communications blackout. The Charnel Guard requested permission to recover the dead. The Flesh Eaters requested release. The Shade Lord listened to each. Then he spoke. Recovery denied. Silence followed. The Charnel Guard Lord's voice came cold over the command link. Our dead are in the fire. They remain there. The Red Talon's commander cut in. State next phase. The Shade Lord looked upon the projected path to the false Primarch's fortified system. Around it glowed surviving rebel strongholds, mortal populations, shrine routes, fleet remnants, and possible surrender approaches. He lifted one pale hand and closed it slowly. No more compliance corridors, he said. Several runes went black. No more surrender channels. More lights died. No more witnesses who can carry his words. The hololith darkened around the inner system until it looked less like a star map and more like a throat closing. The Shade Lord's voice did not rise. Proceed to final isolation. The throne system of the false Primarch did not appear upon imperial charts as a kingdom. It appeared as a wound. At the outer edge lay the first shrine world, a planet of black oceans and silver continents whose entire equator had been carved into a processional road visible from orbit. Pilgrim cities burned across its night side in long chains of devotional fire. Macro statues stood higher than hive spires, everyone depicting the golden black giant with one hand raised over kneeling multitudes. The Emperor was still present in the iconography, but reduced, placed behind the radiant sun as witness, ancestor, and relic. The Lie had learned to wear reverence as armor. Beyond it turned the shipyard moon of Kuldrath Vow, ringed with half-built cruisers, skeletal docks, ammunition shrines, and manufactoria that glowed red through their own smoke. The rebels had dragged everything of value here. Forge moons, pilgrim hulls, captured navy assets, salvaged armor from slain loyalists. Every dock vomited sparks into the void. Every crane moved beneath devotional banners. Every hull under construction bore the crowned wound before it bore a name. Farther inward, reliquary moons orbited in locked formation, each one hollowed and armored, its interior filled with caskets, bones, gene vault fragments, stolen chapter relics, false scriptures, and the preserved corpses of martyrs who had died proclaiming that terror was senile and the returned sun alone could save mankind. Around them moved orbital defense crowns, rings of bastions, lance arrays, torpedo sanctums, shield generators, mine webs, and chained pilgrim arcs converted into sacrificial barriers. The entire system had been made into a cathedral fortress, each world an altar, each moon a gun, each shipyard a womb for treason. At its center, beneath the light of a pale star, waited the throne world. The pentarchy came upon it, not with surprise, but with inevitability. Their fleets translated at the system edge, beneath covering fire from long-range batteries. The red talons formed the iron spine of the advance, their warships moving in disciplined blocks, shields layered, guns loaded for the breaking of planetary infrastructure. The Death Eagles dispersed ahead and below the main formation, vanishing into debris fields and radiation shadows, mapping the hidden teeth of the system. The Charnel Guard moved with grave majesty, ancient ships bearing relic armor in their holds and funeral banners along their flanks. The Flesh Eaters gathered near the forward assault vectors, boarding craft already warmed, assault companies pacing in their drop chapels beneath the watch of chaplains who spoke without ceasing. The Carcharodons held in the dark water of the void, grey hulls cold, patient, and unreadable. The remaining condemned chapters had gathered as well. They no longer wore themselves cleanly. The war had taken too much from them. Their old colours survived only in fragments, shoulder trim, helm markings, half-burned banners, honour plates riveted over new paint. At the heart of the throne system, their survivors had been repainted into a single heraldry: gold and black, white flame, the crowned wound. They had abandoned the visible distinction of their old brotherhoods and made themselves angels of the myth that had consumed them. They called themselves the Returned Host. Others named them the False Sun's Angels. They were drawn from the wreckage of all the surviving condemned chapters, Jade Talon's remnants who had escaped Caribian before the drowning, veterans from redacted lineages whose names had been burned from imperial record, Terminators wearing mixed suits of ancient plate, their old badges filed away beneath fresh devotional gold, chaplains carrying Crozius heads remade into sunburst icons, apothecaries with their white armor stained black at the wrists, captains who had torn their former chapter names from their own tongues and sworn they would be known only by proximity to the radiant sun. They stood before the throne system's outer defense screen and spoke across the void. Their words were grand, wounded, and persuasive enough to have doomed lesser men. "Brothers of the pentarchy," came the first transmission, its speaker a captain of the Returned Host, whose helm had been fashioned into the likeness of a mourning angel. "You have been lied to by mortal carrion enthroned in dust. You have crossed half a segmentum at the command of parchment kings. You have burned gene lines, butchered worlds, and chained the servants of mankind because the High Lords fear what they cannot command." The pentarchy advanced. The transmission continued. "Terror is old. You know this in the marrow of your bones. Its masters are parasites clinging to the corpse light of a father they cannot hear. They feed mankind to bureaucracy, tithe, and slow extinction. But a son has returned, not a memory, not a statue, not a prayer sealed behind palace walls. A living son, a warlord of the Emperor's blood, a Primarch to lead the species out of decay." The Red Talons did not answer. Their gunnery officers adjusted target locks. The Death Eagles did not answer. Their scouts recorded signal origin and began killing relay nodes. The Charnel Guard did not answer. Their commanders listened with faces like tomb effigies, and if grief moved behind their helms, it did not reach their hands. The Flesh Eaters answered only with the rising growl of assault craft engines. The Carcharodons treated the entire claim as weather. In the strategium of the grey flagship, the Shade Lord stood before the hololithic image of the throne system. Serfs knelt around him, some bleeding from the ears beneath the pressure of the enemy transmission. The Harvester Prime marked signal branches as they appeared, feeding them into kill logic. The Reaper Prime stood motionless beside a chained prisoner taken from an outer picket. The prisoner was a captain of the Returned Host. His armor had once belonged to a condemned chapter whose name the record refused to preserve. Now it was black and gold, cracked across the breastplate, his old heraldry scraped away so violently that gouges remained beneath the new sigil. His helm was gone. Blood ran from a cut over one eye. He knelt because both legs had been broken by a Carcharodon thunderhammer, but his back remained straight. Hate had not left him. Neither had conviction. He looked up at the Shade Lord as the void filled with the voice of his brothers. "You hear truth and call it contamination," the captain said. "You know what stands at the heart of this system. You know it in the silence you hide behind. Tell me, Grey Butcher, if he is what he claims, if he is truly a son of the Emperor, would you kill him because Terra ordered it?" The Shade Lord looked down at him. No anger crossed his face. No doubt. No recognition of the moral weight the prisoner tried to place before him. The captain smiled through blood. "Answer me. Would the Carcharodons kill a true Primarch if commanded by men unworthy to polish his armor?" The chamber seemed to listen. Even the serfs stopped breathing. The Shade Lord spoke softly. "Truth is not our burden. Execution is." The captain's smile died. The Reaper Prime took him away. Outside, the first bombardment began. For 6 days, the pentarchy hammered the outer shrine worlds and orbital crowns. The void became a furnace of overlapping fire. Macro cannon broadsides rolled through the dark like iron storms. Lance beams cut through shield flare and mine haze. Torpedoes struck defense platforms and birthed brief suns. Red Talon's batteries worked without pause, shifting from orbital bastions to shipyard docks to moon-based plasma silos with relentless precision. The Death Eagles gutted sensor clusters and beacon towers, opening blind patches in the defense grid. Charnel Guard relic ships unleashed ancient weapon patterns that painted the void in colors no mortal eye should have watched. Flesh-eaters boarding waves took chained pilgrim arcs and turned them into drifting charnel houses. Still, the planetary shields held. The throne system had been prepared by traitors who understood imperial war. Its void shields layered over cities, bastions, shield temples, manufactoria, starports, command basilicas, and generator cathedrals buried beneath kilometers of armor and stone. Each shield was fed by reactor vaults linked through redundant prayer engines and astropathic command rights. Bombardment cracked continents, but did not open the core worlds. It turned outer cities into ash, shattered orbital docks, boiled seas, and killed tens of millions in firestorms, but the shield crowns remained. The false Primarch had not built a fortress to survive forever. He had built one to make every approach cost blood enough to become myth. So the pentarchy went down. Multi-theater invasion began across the shield approach zones. Mortal armies descended first, as always, because the Imperium spent human life as if the species were infinite and time were not. Dropships blackened the skies. Landers came through flak so thick that entire squadrons disappeared before touching ground. Regiments from 100 loyal worlds marched into trench systems dug before they arrived, across plains already ranged by cathedral-sized defense guns. Solar auxilia descended formations in sealed warplate, advanced through poison fog and artillery storms, their discipline perfect and their casualties obscene. Penal hosts were driven into minefields to clear the path by dying. Siege engineers built bridges from wreckage, stone, and bodies. The shield approach trenches swallowed them. They crossed continents in red lines, deep enough to hide Titan legs, wide enough to hold entire armored divisions. Their walls were reinforced with ferrocrete, bone, and melted devotional statues. Heavy guns fired from cathedral-sized emplacements whose barrel mouths glowed like furnace doors. Every shell that landed compacted hundreds of men into the mud. Every counter-barrage threw limbs, lasguns, helmets, prayer books, and wet earth into the air. Soon the trenches no longer contained soil. They contained a red paste of pulverized bodies, ash, oil, and rain, churned by tracks and boots until soldiers advanced through the remains of the regiments before them. Billions died across the shield approaches. The archive would later store their numbers in compressed casualty hymns because no ordinary roll could hold them. Men drowned in mud made from men. Armored columns vanished beneath defense laser fire. Commissars executed officers who lost direction in the smoke. Medici stations were shelled until the wounded became indistinguishable from the ground. Priests walked into artillery with loudhailers raised and were scattered across the trenches in pink mist. Still, the lines moved forward, meter by meter, corpse by corpse, until the defense guns had to keep firing downward and the shield generator networks had to keep drawing power to hold. That was all the pentarchy required. Beneath the capital hive of the second shrine world, the Carcharodons entered the underhive. Their target was shield generator Cathedral Helicon Deep, one of the primary nodes maintaining the eastern planetary shield. It could not be reached from orbit. It could not be broken by surface assault without killing millions more and delaying the invasion long enough for the rebel fleet to regroup. Its access vaults were protected by fortress gates, Terminator cadres, void-shielded tunnels, and miles of loyal fanatics who would gladly die before allowing the generator to fall. The Carcharodons did not use the gates. They descended through sewage oceans. Beneath the hive, beneath the corpse-rendering plants, beneath the pilgrim drains, beneath the sanctified waterworks and sump cathedrals, stretched a black, drowned underworld. Rivers of chemical waste flowed through tunnels large enough for gunships. Corpse fat floated in rainbow slicks upon stagnant reservoirs. Bone grinders clattered in the dark, still reducing the dead into nutrient slurry for a hive that no longer cared who it consumed. Mutant warrens nested inside broken pipes. Blind things with too many limbs clung to the ceilings and fled from the passing of grey warriors. The Carcharodons moved without vox chatter. No one gave reassurance. No one cursed the filth. No one spoke prayers aloud. They walked through chest-deep sewage with weapons raised, white helms turning slowly, black lenses reading heat, motion, electrical pulse, and fear. Devourer squads killed the underhive mutants silently, with knives and suppressed bolt shots when possible, chain blades when necessary. Their bodies were pushed beneath the sludge and left for the current. The Harvester Prime navigated by stolen maintenance hymns and dead maps. The Carcharodon librarian walked behind him, hood raised, psychic senses pressed flat against the noise of the city above. Through kilometers of stone, steel, and blood-soaked habitation, they could feel the generator cathedral pulsing. It was not a machine alone. It had been turned into a devotional heart. Thousands prayed around it. Choir engines sang to it. Reactor priests fed it words, oil, and blood. Around its inner sanctum, the false sun's angels waited. The Carcharodons reached the corpse, rendering plants beneath Helicon Deep, and ascended through the machinery. There, the smell became dense enough to feel alive. Conveyor belts carried bodies from the battlefields above, loyalist and traitor alike, stripped by automated claws, boiled in vats, separated into fat, bone, meat, and slurry. The workers had fled or been conscripted to the defense. Servitors remained, dragging hooks through mountains of dead. Carcharodon kill teams passed through hanging curtains of skin and steam. A devourer brushed aside a line of suspended torsos and stepped into an elevator shaft packed with old gore. They climbed. At the top, they found the first Guardians. The false sun's angels wore black and gold in the generator undercrypt, their Terminator plate inscribed with oaths to the returned sun. Some still bore hints of their lost chapters beneath the repainting. A green knee guard, a crimson gauntlet, a bone-white helm stripe. They stood before the generator cathedral's lower reliquary doors, thunderhammers grounded, storm shields raised, assault cannons waiting. Their leader voxed across the chamber. "You come from filth, because that is where terror keeps you." The Carcharodons did not answer. The Red Brethren emerged from the corpse elevator shafts. The first exchange shattered the undercrypt. Storm bolters thundered. Assault cannons screamed. The air became fragments of stone, sparks, shell casings, blood spray, and armor chips. A Red Brethren Terminator took a thunderhammer strike square in the chest and was driven backward into a rendering hook rack. the impact folding his breastplate inward. He rose anyway, one lung flooding, power fist closing around the haft of the hammer. Another Red Brethren stepped past him and fired into the Guardian's knee until the joint exploded, then stamped down on the traitor's helm until the lenses burst inward. The melee slowed into brutal inevitability. This was not the frenzy of the flesh-eaters, nor the graceful morning violence of the charnel guard. It was plate-cracking pressure, Terminator against Terminator, strength against strength, hammers falling like industrial pistons, chain fists chewing through shields, lightning claws scraping over ceramite until they found seals, power fists driving warriors into walls, hard enough to leave armored silhouettes in stone. A false sun's angel drove his thunderhammer through a Carcharodon's shoulder and pinned him to a generator buttress. The impaled Red Brethren seized the traitor's gorget with both hands and held him in place, while another Carcharodon cut him open from spine to sternum with a chain fist. The Guardian leader fought to the last, his storm shield cracked, his helm half torn away, one eye visible and blazing with faith. "He will rise," he snarled. "He will forgive you nothing." A Red Brethren champion gripped the traitor's breastplate and pulled until the armor split. The words became a choking sound as the champion drove a power fist into the opening and crushed the organs beneath. The generator cathedral lay beyond. It rose through the core of the hive like a god engine made immobile. A vast column of reactor light, shield vanes, prayer turbines, and stained glass depicting the false Primarch ascending over kneeling worlds. Thousands of reactor priests turned as the Carcharodons entered. Some screamed, some began to chant louder, some threw themselves into the machinery to overload it rather than let the shield fail. The Harvester Prime had already marked the control arteries. Charges were placed. The librarian broke the choir's psychic alignment with a gesture that made every sanctioned throat in the chamber burst at once. Blood sheeted down the prayer steps. Devourers shot the reactor priests at their stations. Red Brethren formed a wall before the main doors as surviving Guardians counterattacked from upper galleries. The Shade Lord's voice entered the local vox for the first time since the descent. "Cut the heart." The charges detonated. Helican Deep did not explode at once. It screamed first. Its shield vanes spun out of harmony. Its prayer turbines tore themselves apart. Reactor light pulsed blue, then white, then black at the edges. Across the shrine world above, the eastern shield flickered. Defense guns stuttered. Loyalist commanders looked up from trenches made of meat and saw the impossible. The sky opened. Through the failing shield, the fleets of the pentarchy looked down. Orbital fire descended. The collapse of Helican Deep did not open a path. It opened a wound wide enough for the pentarchy to put both hands inside and tear. Orbital fire poured through the broken shield like wrath given mathematics. Lance beams cut across the shrine world's eastern hemisphere, shearing defense towers from their roots and turning entire artillery districts into white craters. Macro shells fell among basilica gun lines, lifting cathedrals, hab stacks, armor parks, and pilgrim musters into the clouds as ash. The sky burned in layers. Above it, the void war tightened around the remaining defense crowns. Below it, the ground war became a continuous nightmare of Astartes killing Astartes across fortress worlds, orbital platforms, moon bastions, and the corpse-choked avenues between them. The condemned chapters did not break cleanly. They broke like old iron under a hammer, jagged and screaming. On the western continent of the Second Shrine World, the flesh-eaters breached the great bastion of St. Kelth's Gate. The bastion had been built into a mountain range, its walls cut from black stone and plated in adamantium, its gun decks arranged like the ribs of a steel god. For 3 days, it had slaughtered loyalist army groups moving beneath the shield approaches. Its defense lasers had opened troop carriers in the air. Its mortar batteries had churned regiments into red mud. Its chapel guns had fired from behind stained glass images of the false Primarch, each pane showing him taller than the Emperor, brighter than terror, less a warrior than a verdict. The flesh-eaters ended it with assault ramps, melter charges, and hunger barely held in chains. Their drop craft came in low through smoke and flak, screaming over the corpse fields with wings burning. Impact claws struck the outer parapets. Boarding ramps slammed down before the engines had steadied. Red-armored warriors hurled themselves into the defenses, with chain blades already roaring. Their chaplains followed, Crozius heads blazing, voices hammering through the vox in litanies that were command, warning, and threat. Forward, kill forward, do not drink, do not stray, kill forward. The defenders met them with bolter fire and oath songs. Astartes in black and gold, remnants of condemned lines repainted beneath the myth of the returned sun, formed ranks at the gate towers. Mortal auxiliaries packed the murder galleries behind them. Heavy flamers turned access bridges into rivers of fire. The flesh-eaters ran through it, armor blackened, flesh cooked beneath. Cracked seals. Warriors fell, rose, or were trampled by the brothers behind them. Eviscerators struck storm shields and screamed as teeth shattered. Chainswords bit into elbows, gorgets, knee joints, and exposed cables. Bolt pistols barked against helms, close enough for the muzzle flash to scorch ceramite. When the gate fell, restraint began to fail. The defenders withdrew through the inner bastion into civilian hab stacks built against the mountain's rear slope. The habs had been filled with shrine workers, armory slaves, families of garrison serfs, wounded auxiliaries, pilgrim militia, and children taught to sing the wrong prayers. The condemned Astartes used them as cover, firing from between habitation towers, through chapel laundries, over ration courts and medici balconies. They believed the flesh-eaters would slow. They were wrong. The red warriors pursued into the habs, and the bastion's fall became something worse than battle. Doors were kicked inward, stairwells became slaughter wells, barricades of furniture, bodies, and devotional icons were ripped apart. Mortal defenders were cut down so quickly that some died still kneeling. A flesh-eater drove his chainsword through a rebel sergeant and into the wall behind him, then leaned close as the weapon chewed both armor and stone. Another fired into a room until the walls were painted with fragments and steam. Their chaplains fought to contain the assault, dragging brothers from side chambers, striking helms with Crozius hafts, roaring until vox channels cracked. Kill forward, not down, not aside, forward. Some obeyed at once. Some had to be beaten into obedience. The western continental bastion died in blood, but the flesh-eaters came out of it changed for the worse, their armor slick, their silence more dangerous than their battle cries. Elsewhere, on the reliquary moon of coronal ash, the charnel guard fought like a crypt legion, waking into a burning dream. The moon had been hollowed into vaults where the condemned had stored trophies, relic banners, broken armor of fallen brothers, captured saints' bones, forbidden scriptures, and fragments of gene lines rescued from earlier defeats. Its inner galleries were broad enough for tanks, high enough for aircraft, and packed with shrine fires that turned the air gold and red. The charnel guard entered through the northern mausoleum breach, their stasis-preserved veterans marching beneath banners that had slept through centuries. Their armor was crimson and bone, their weapons old, their bearings solemn beyond fear. The rebels sent their ancients to meet them. Dreadnoughts of the condemned lines strode through burning reliquaries, sarcophagi painted black and gold, old names carved away and replaced with praise for the returned sun. Some had served since wars no living mortal remembered. Some still bore fragments of their old chapter heraldry beneath fresh defacement. Their voices boomed from vox grills, cracked with age, pain, and conviction. Turn back, sons of blood. You murder what may yet save mankind. The charnel guard answered with relic cannon fire. The duel became slow, massive, and intimate. Contemptor frames smashed through reliquary pillars. Castroferum sarcophagi traded multi-melter blasts across aisles of burning bones. Charnel Guard veterans moved between the giants, power blades flashing, Volkite weapons reducing mortal attendants to ash shadows. A rebel ancient caught a charnel guard captain in a siege claw and crushed his torso until blood ran from the armor seams, only for a stasis-woken veteran to drive a power lance through the dreadnought's sarcophagus slit and hold it there while the machine screamed the false Primarch's name in 3 broken voices. The reliquaries burned around them. St. Bones cracked in their cases. Banners shriveled. Gene caskets detonated under heat. A charnel guard fellblade rolled through the central nave of the moon vault, its tracks grinding relic tiles into dust, its main cannon turning toward a rebel dreadnought lord who stood before an altar made from the armor of dead loyalists. The ancient traitor raised his fist. "We remember our name." The fellblade fired. Afterward, there was no name left in the crater. In the void above the throne system, the Death Eagles removed the rebel fleet masters. The command arc voice of the returned hung behind the 3rd defense crown, a colossal vessel formed from 3 conjoined pilgrim arcs, a naval command spine, and an armored basilica fused to its back like a parasite of faith. From within it, the remaining rebel admirals coordinated ship movements, orbital fire, defense crown rotation, and evacuation corridors toward the innermost shrine world. It was too heavily shielded for immediate destruction and too surrounded by escorts for conventional boarding. The Death Eagles had no interest in conventional anything. They entered through the corpse disposal vents. Their kill teams crossed the outer hull during a radiation storm, mag boots locked, black armor invisible against scorched plating. They cut into waste channels used to eject the dead from overfilled pilgrim decks and moved through ducts slick with frozen blood. No broad assault sounded. No alarm rose until the first fleet master died with a blade through his spine while studying withdrawal vectors. The second was killed in his command chapel when a Death Eagle's marksman fired through 3 layers of stained glass and 1 priest to put a round through his throat. The third tried to seal the arc by deck sections and discovered the control shrine had already been taken. By the time the rebels understood the attack, their command hierarchy had become a room full of corpses. Death Eagle's sergeants placed charges on the Strategium Cogitators, copied what they needed, and left the command arc alive but leaderless. Its ships awaited orders that would never come. During the next orbital maneuver, whole squadrons drifted out of alignment, blocking the fire arcs of their own defense crown. Red Talon's batteries punished the error before any lesser commander could repair it. The Red Talons, meanwhile, made a trap of themselves. On the armor plains of Varos Tertian, a fortress world whose equatorial belt was one endless tank war, they drove an armored spearhead toward the enemy's strongest mobile reserve. Land raiders, predators, Sicaran battle tanks, vindicators, and super-heavy engines advanced beneath a sky black with smoke. The rebel commanders saw an overextension. They saw a loyalist spearhead isolated between ruined Manufactoria ridges and shielded ravines. They committed everything nearby: traitor armor, infantry carriers, hunter-killer packs, dreadnoughts chained to transport crawlers, and mortal tank regiments desperate to break the Iron Suns. The Red Talons knew. They advanced anyway. Their lead vehicles took punishment that would have halted a lesser force. Tanks burned, tracks broke, hulls opened and spilled fire. Red Talon's infantry dismounted into shell craters and continued firing. Their commander waited until the enemy closed from 3 directions, until retreat was impossible, until both lines had compressed into the kill box. Then he ordered the concealed orbital strikes onto his own forward coordinates. The sky fell. Lance fire descended through smoke and storm. Macro shells struck among loyalist and rebel armor alike. The earth became a chain of eruptions. Tanks vanished. Dreadnoughts were flipped like toys and broken upon burning ridges. Mortal crews were vaporized inside their hulls. Red Talons died with the enemy at contact range. Their sacrifice entered into the calculation before the first engine had advanced. When the bombardment ended, there was no spearhead, no reserve, no trap, no glory. Only a continent of burning armor and a Red Talon's commander already assigning the next formation to exploit the absence. At the heart of the system, beneath the central palace moon, the Carcharodons descended upon the Gene Seed Cathedral. It was called the Basilica of Undying Suns by those who worshipped there. It had been built inside an artificial cavern beneath a reliquary city, its vaulted roof held by pillars carved with the names of all 11 condemned chapters. Some names had been hidden by imperial censorship, but here they remained in full, gilded, cherished, and guarded. The cathedral's central nave housed the last great preservation attempt of the false Primarch's cause. Apothecaries from multiple rebel lines labored beneath black and gold light, trying to save what the pentarchy had come to erase. Gene seed caskets stood in armored rows. Amniotic tanks held organs in sacred suspension. Surgical engines clicked above slab tables. Aspirants lay in restraint cradles, some conscious, some drugged, some already opened for implantation. Serf clans knelt in family groups beneath the pillars, each sworn to carry memory if the vault fell. Relic banners hung from the ceiling, patched, burned, and blood stiffened. Data shrines hummed with chapter histories, recruitment songs, gene maps, apothecarian ledgers, battlefield honors, and the myths that would allow a dead brotherhood to be born again. The Carcharodons entered from above and below at the same time. Drop claws punched through the cavern roof. Melter drills breached the lower crypts. Devourers fell through dust and broken stone into the nave with bolters firing. Red Brethren came through the undercroft doors, their storm bolters already tearing apart serf guards. The cathedral became close, sacred, and hideous. The rebel apothecaries fought like men trying to hold back extinction with knives. Their narthecium blades punched through armor seals. Their reductor tools opened Carcharodon plate and sought progenoid glands even amid the melee. One drove his surgical gauntlet into a devourer's neck and ripped out a cluster of implanted tissue before the Carcharodon head-butted him hard enough to crush his faceplate. Another fired a bolt pistol into an amniotic tank to deny its contents, then charged with a chain blade mounted beneath his wrist, cutting into grey armor until a Red Brethren warrior closed a power fist around his torso and folded him in half. Progenoid caskets cracked under boots. Sacred organs spilled across marble floors in nutrient fluid and blood. Amniotic tanks burst beneath stray fire, washing the nave in warm liquid and half-formed biological ruin. Aspirants screamed from restraint cradles as alarms howled and ceiling icons collapsed into the fighting. A Carcharodon sergeant shot 3 serf elders who tried to carry data scrolls into an escape tunnel. Another tore down a relic banner and threw it into promethium flame without reading the name embroidered upon it. At the far end of the cathedral, a rebel dreadnought guarded the deepest vault. Its sarcophagus was old, its armor a patchwork of former colors repainted beneath the false Primarch's mark. Chains of parchment hung from its chassis. Its assault cannon was empty. One claw was broken. It had already killed 4 Carcharodons and stood amid their bodies like a wounded idol. A Carcharodon company master approached through the burning nave, thunderhammer in one hand, bolter empty at his hip. The dreadnought turned toward him, vox crackling with age and pain. "Executioner," it said, "hear me." The company master halted. Around them, the Gene Seed Cathedral died. The Harvester Prime serfs placed charges along data shrines. Devourers burned aspirant records. Red Brethren forced the last apothecaries back from the vault doors. The dreadnought's sarcophagus lights flickered. "My chapter had a name before this madness," the ancient said. "It had honor, worlds saved, oaths kept, brothers buried beneath loyal stone. Tell me that much will survive. Tell me our name will remain as warning, if not as glory." The company master said nothing. The dreadnought's claw twitched. "Tell me." The company master turned his head slightly. 2 Carcharodon serfs ran forward beneath covering fire. carrying melter charges in both arms. They clamped them to the dreadnought sarcophagus, while the Ancient tried to move, wounded servos grinding, weapon arm rising too slowly. The company master watched without expression. The charges detonated. The sarcophagus became white heat, then molten ruin. Whatever name had lived inside it died unheard. The Carcharodons did not merely win the cathedral, they made restoration impossible. Gene seed burned, records melted, heraldry was ground beneath boots or cast into furnaces. Aspirant stock was sorted, condemned, chained, or incinerated. Serf clans were broken apart, so no family could carry an unbroken song. Relic banners were cut into strips and fed to flame. Chapel stones bearing chapter histories were shattered by thunderhammers. Data cores were spiked, copied for target intelligence, then destroyed. The Harvester Prime walked through the ruin, marking each erased continuity with cold precision. No heir, no archive, no oath, no grave. By the time the Basilica of Undying Suns collapsed into fire, multiple condemned chapters had ceased to exist in any recoverable sense. They still had warriors fighting elsewhere. They still had ships under arms. They still had captains shouting orders, and chaplains promising vengeance. But their futures had been slaughtered beneath the palace moon, and war without a future was only the delaying motion of a corpse. Across the system, the surviving condemned chapters began to retreat. Not outward. The Death Eagles had made outward movement impossible, not to the shipyards. The Red Talons had shattered them, not to the reliquary moons. The Charnel Guard had burned their dead, not to the continental bastions. The Flesh-Eaters had made them abattoirs. They retreated inward, toward the last shrine world, toward the palace at the center of the stolen faith. There, beneath towers built from oath stone and armor plate, beneath banners woven from the colors of 11 condemned brotherhoods, beneath a throne hall raised upon the bones of loyal worlds, the false Primarch waited. His palace had been built from 11 oaths, and now each oath was breaking. The final assault did not begin with a charge. It began with procession. The innermost shrine world was already dying when the pentarchy descended upon it. Its oceans burned in black bands around the equator, slick with promethium, corpse fat, and the wreckage of pilgrim fleets dragged down by orbital fire. Its continents glowed beneath a pall of ash. Palace districts cracked under sustained bombardment. Defense crowns hung in ruin above the atmosphere, their broken rings shedding fragments that fell through the clouds like iron meteors. The sky was no longer a sky, but a wound of fire, contrails, void shield flare, and the falling bones of ships. Still, the palace stood. It rose from the world's largest continent, a mountain of black marble, gold adamantium, and stolen oathstone. 11 causeways led to it across plains of pulverized basilicas and shattered statues. 11 gate towers guarded its approach. 11 banners hung from its heights, each one woven from the colors and relic cloth of a condemned chapter, each one burning at the edges, each one refusing to fall. Above the central throne basilica, the crowned wound shone in cold light, projected into the smoke by dying engines beneath the palace heart. The pentarchy advanced as if conducting a ritual execution. No demand was sent, no surrender was offered, no challenge was declared. The Red Talons moved first, armored formations grinding through the ash wastes in perfect lines, their tanks coated in grey dust and old blood. They fired as they advanced, eliminating defense nodes, gate guns, shield shrines, and infantry concentrations with the patience of men solving a problem by subtraction. Behind them came mortal army formations, reduced to fragments by the campaign, their banners ragged, their officers hollow-eyed, their boots sinking into the red mire made from the dead of the previous assaults. The Charnel Guard came like a funeral host. Their ancient war engines rolled between the Red Talon's spearheads and the burning processional statues, fell-blade cannons turning toward each new fortress organ that dared speak. Their veterans marched beneath ashfall, crimson and bone armor dulled by smoke, relic blades drawn, helms lowered in solemn wrath. They seemed less like warriors advancing into battle than tomb guardians entering the chamber of a king who had no right to sleep. The flesh-eaters came restless and terrible. Their chaplains stalked among them, voices raw from days of restraint, Crozius heads stained dark, every litany sharpened into a chain around the throat of hunger. The assault companies moved in broken silence, worse than shouting, their armor scored by bastion war and hab slaughter, their hands flexing around chain blades as if they heard something beneath the palace calling them to feast. The Death Eagles were already inside the smoke, unseen, killing observers, relay priests, hidden gunners, and retreat signalers. Wherever a rebel officer lifted his head to understand the assault, a round found him. Wherever a Vox tower tried to transmit, it died. Escape lanes became blind alleys. Muster points became graves. The palace began to lose knowledge of itself. The Carcharodons came last, and yet seemed to have been there all along. Grey warriors moved through bombardment haze without haste, their white helms turning slowly, their black lenses empty of awe. Red brethren walked at the center, Terminator plate grinding over bone dust and marble shards. Devourer squads moved in flanking shadows, bolters low, chain axes ready. The Shade Lord walked among them bareheaded beneath the poisoned sky, pale face streaked with ash, black eyes fixed upon the throne basilica. The mortal soldiers broke before the palace gates were reached, not from artillery, not from fear of death. Death had become ordinary by then, a climate, a texture underfoot. They broke because the doors opened and he came out. The false Primarch appeared upon the 11th stair of the throne basilica. Every record thereafter contradicted every other record, and all were sealed beneath pain of mind death. Some said he wore armor of gold and black, radiant as a sun seen through cathedral glass. Some said the gold was not gold, but old bone polished by impossible light. Some said his armor bore no heraldry at all, only reflections of whatever each witness most wished to serve. Some said he was too tall, towering above Astartes, as Astartes towered above men. Others swore he was not tall enough, and that this wrongness was the first crack in the illusion. Some saw a noble face scarred by grief. Some saw a mask. Some saw the emperor's sorrow. Some saw only a shape their minds refused to keep. He might have been a clone bred from stolen gene craft. He might have been a warp-shaped idol made from desire and treachery. He might have been a weapon from an older age, lost, damaged, and clothed in myth. He might have been a deluded giant whose presence became true only because enough desperate souls believed. He might have been nothing more than a political nightmare in armor, given form by the imperium's hunger for returned sons. The record never decided. His presence was enough. Across the loyalist lines, mortal men fell to their knees in the ash. Some vomited into their rebreathers. Some wept without knowing why. Some threw aside rifles and clawed at their eyes. A company of siege infantry began reciting the wrong prayer in perfect unison until their commissar shot the first rank, then the second, then himself. Tank crews halted engines. Banner bearers dropped standards. A priest screamed that salvation had come and ran toward the palace with arms outstretched, only to vanish beneath Red Talon's fire before his contagion could spread. Even some Astartes felt the pressure of him. A flesh-eater halted mid-stride, chain-blade lowered, helm tilted, as if hearing his gene father's name spoken from a great distance. His chaplain struck him across the helm hard enough to crack the red plate and roared him back into motion. A Charnel Guard veteran sank to one knee for less than a heartbeat before rising again with both hands locked around his blade, his vox filled with static and a prayer for forgiveness. A Death Eagle's marksman missed his first shot by the width of a hand and then calmly put a second round through the throat of the rebel beside his intended target. The Carcharodons were least moved, not because they were purer, not because they were stronger in soul, because they had built themselves around absence. They had lived beyond praise, beyond feast halls, beyond banners bright enough to comfort, beyond the gaze of brothers who would call them noble. Exile had hollowed them. Silence had armored them. Obedience without emotional communion had become their fortress. The false Primarch's aura found little warmth to seize. It found no longing for return that had not already been strangled. It found no need for legitimacy that duty had not drowned. The golden black giant descended the stair. The palace guns fell silent. The rebel Astartes gathered around him, the last of the returned host, armor battered, banners torn, eyes bright with the terrible joy of those who believe death in the shadow of their lord will become immortality. They formed rings around him, terminators at the inner circle, captains and chaplains behind them, line warriors and wounded dreadnoughts beyond. Mortal fanatics filled the lower steps, chanting through cracked lips as ash fell upon their faces. The false Primarch looked across the battlefield and found the Shade Lord. Recognition moved over his face, or something wearing recognition did. "Son of forgotten darkness," he said, and his voice carried through bombardment, through sealed helms, through broken vox channels, through the bones of every man who heard it. "I know what they made of you. I know where they cast you. I know the wars without witness, the hungers without honor, the centuries beyond the map. You were not meant to be." Nameless. The Carcharodons halted. The Shade Lord did not bow. The false Primarch stepped down another stair. Light moved around him like a cloak beneath water. "Come from the dark. Bring your grey brothers with you. I will name you before mankind. I will give you place, honor, legitimacy. No more exile, no more silence, no more being thrown like knives into waters too black for saints. Stand with me, and I will make the Imperium remember what it owes its lost sons." The offer crossed the field like warmth entering a tomb. The Shade Lord looked at him without anger. "We were not sent to be named," he said. "We were sent to end you." Then the execution began. It was not a duel. No champion stepped forward to test glory against glory. No circle cleared. No oath was exchanged. The pentarchy attacked the way men attack a dangerous beast, when the survival of worlds depends upon its death. Death Eagle's snipers fired first. Rounds crossed the ash haze from angles mapped before the palace doors had opened. 3 struck the false Primarch's halo field and shattered into sparks. One found a joint beneath his pauldron and detonated against armor harder than reason. Another struck his cheek and drew blood that shone too bright before turning black in the air. The returned host surged forward to cover him. The first rank died under concentrated fire. The Carcharodon librarian struck next, not with words, but with pressure. The air around the false Primarch bent inward as psychic force closed like a fist. For an instant, the golden black giant's outline flickered. Those watching saw different things in the fracture. A face beneath a face, a crown of thorns made from warp light, a surgical brand, a child screaming inside an adult shape, a Primarch's shadow with no Primarch inside it. Then the light snapped back, and the librarian staggered, blood pouring from his nose and eyes. The red talons triggered the first melter trap. Charges buried beneath the 11th stair detonated as the false Primarch advanced. White heat engulfed him, and half his bodyguard. Rebel Terminators vanished in molten armor. The stair became glass. The giant emerged from the fire with his left arm blackened, armor running like wax at the edges, but still moving. The flesh-eaters hit the outer guard. They came like a red storm, chaplains roaring restraint and permission in the same breath. The returned host met them with old discipline and dying faith. Chainswords clashed. Crozius heads broke helms. Lightning claws opened bellies. Bolt pistols fired through eye lenses and mouth grills. The flesh-eaters tried to cut toward the central figure and were stopped by rebels throwing themselves into the path, willing to die as walls of meat and ceramite. The charnel guard advanced into the gap, relic blades shining amid ash. Their veterans met rebel ancients at the basilica steps, sword against axe, spear against claw, dignity against desperation. One charnel guard lord drove his blade through a condemned captain's chest and whispered a death prayer as the traitor tried to bless him in the false Primarch's name. A dreadnought of the returned host crushed 2 stasis-woken veterans beneath its fists before a fell-blade shell struck it from the flank and hurled its sarcophagus into the palace wall in a spray of oil and bone. The Red Talons maintained orbital targeting locks even as friendly forces closed. Their commanders marked distances, probabilities, acceptable loss. Lance fire struck the upper terraces, cutting off reinforcement streams. Macro shells fell behind the returned host, turning reserves into craters. When a rebel countercharge threatened to break into the Carcharodon line, a Red Talon strike cruiser fired on the coordinates with loyalists still inside them. The explosion erased both sides and created a path. Through that path came the Carcharodons. They carved with cold industrial violence. No challenges, no insults, no answer to pleas or accusations. Devourers cut down rebels who tried to interpose themselves. Chain axes bit into hips, knees, wrists, throats. Bolters fired into wounded Astartes before they could be recovered. A returned host chaplain raised his crozius and cried that the true son would remember every martyr. A Carcharodon sergeant shot away his jaw, stepped close, and drove a combat blade up under the helm until the chaplain stopped moving. Red Brethren forced their way up the stairs, storm bolters churning the bodyguard rings into fragments, power fists cracking breastplates, chain fists opening Terminator armor as if dismantling engines. Still, the false Primarch would not fall. He moved among them with terrible grace. His blade, if it was a blade, burned black at the edge and gold at the core. It cut through a Red Brethren warrior from shoulder to hip. It split a Red Talon's champion's shield and the arm behind it. It struck a flesh-eater reclusiarch hard enough to hurl him down the stairs, trailing broken armor. It turned aside a charnel guard relic spear and shattered the hands that held it. Wherever he stepped, mortal rebels rose from despair and fought again. Wherever he looked, weak minds broke. But the pentarchy did not need one hero to best him. It needed weight. Another psychic strike staggered him. Another sniper round struck the wound beneath his pauldron. Melter fire washed across his legs. A Red Brethren champion locked both arms around him from behind and held for 3 seconds before being torn in half. Those 3 seconds were enough for the Red Talons to place a lance strike through the basilica roof. The beam did not hit him directly. It collapsed the vault above him, dropping tons of sanctified stone, burning icons, and shattered oath pillars upon the central stair. The false Primarch rose from the ruin. The Shade Lord was there. He did not rush. He did not roar. He stepped through smoke and falling ash with his blade drawn. Around him, the last bodyguards of the returned host died under Carcharodon fire. A rebel captain crawled toward the giant, both legs gone, reaching as if to touch divinity. A devourer put a bolt through the back of his helm without slowing. The false Primarch looked at the Shade Lord one last time. "Nameless thing," he said, and now there was pain in the voice, and anger beneath the warmth. "You could have been restored." The Shade Lord raised his blade. "We were sufficient." The final blow was not his alone. A Death Eagle's round shattered the giant's right eye. The Carcharodon librarian burned through the aura around him with a scream that killed 3 nearby serfs. A flesh-eater chaplain drove his crozius into the false Primarch's wounded knee. A charnel guard veteran thrust a relic blade through the gap beneath his ribs. A Red Talon's melter blast took him full in the chest. The Shade Lord's blade entered last, under the sternum, through the blackened armor, into whatever heart or engine or lie had moved within him. The false Primarch fell inside his own throne basilica, not to honor, not to revelation, not to a single champion whose name would be carved into song. He fell to the combined brutality of 5 chapters, built for unforgivable work. The palace seemed to inhale when he struck the floor. Then the sound of the war changed. Across the throne world, Rebel formations faltered. Some fought harder, some died screaming, some simply stopped, as if the strings within them had been cut. Mortal fanatics clawed at the basilica steps until Carcharodons shot them down. Surviving members of the returned host threw themselves onto the body and were dragged away, dismembered, burned, or crushed beneath Terminator boots. The Shade Lord stood over the corpse. It was already changing, or perhaps it had never been stable to begin with. The armor steamed, the blood darkened, the face seemed noble, then ruined, then unfamiliar, then too bright to look at, then nothing but meat beneath cracked light. The charnel guard demanded examination. The Death Eagles requested controlled containment. The Red Talons advised immediate destruction. The Flesh Eater's chaplain warned that his warriors could still hear the dead thing whispering. The Carcharodon librarian said nothing, but his eyes bled black. The Shade Lord gave the only order that mattered. Burn it. Phosphex and Promethium were brought. The body of the false Primarch was set alight beneath the throne he had built from stolen oaths. White-green fire crawled over the armor, through the wounds, into the mouth that had turned chapters from terror. The palace filled with the stink of sacred oils, charred ceramite, cooked flesh, and something sweeter beneath it that no record would name. No apothecary was permitted to take tissue. No savant was permitted to catalogue bone. No librarian was permitted to touch the dying psychic residue. Those who stepped too close were
ordered back at gunpoint. The corpse burned, and because no one was allowed to examine it long enough to learn the truth, the Imperium was spared an answer. It had not wanted truth. It had wanted silence. Victory did not come with bells. The bells had been broken, melted, silenced, or made into shell casings by the time the last throne world stopped burning. Those that remained hanging in cracked towers had no hands left to pull their ropes. Those that still rang did so only when shockwaves passed through them, giving out low, warped notes over plains of ash and atomized bone. The sound carried across the dead avenues of the false Primarch's palace world like the last breath of a murdered cathedral. The war was won. That was the first lie. The Imperium did not win as bards imagined victory. There were no clean banners raised above cleansed walls. There were no shining processions beneath triumphant choirs. No remembrances were permitted to walk the battlefield and gather noble accounts. No statues were commissioned. No honor rolls were sung across the segmentum. No Lord Militant stood upon a dais and named the fallen glorious. Glory required memory, and memory had become a liability. The body of the thing that had called itself a Primarch had burned beneath Phosphex and Promethium until nothing remained that any apothecary, magos, savant, priest, or inquisitor could confidently name. The throne basilica had collapsed inward around the pyre. Its pillars, each carved with the oaths of condemned Astartes brotherhoods, cracked under bombardment and fell into the fire. The 11 banners were torn down. Some burned, some were shredded, some were taken into sealed custody, only long enough to be tested, condemned, and destroyed. The ash of the false sun mixed with the ash of his bodyguard, his priests, his serfs, his martyrs, and the millions who had died trying to reach or defend his throne. Yet the Imperium understood that the death of the false sun was not the end of the infection. A body could burn. A myth required hunting. The order went out through command channels sealed beneath layered ciphers and death oaths. No chapter line designated Traitoris Perdita was to retain a place of origin, a cult of remembrance, a preserve of serfs, a store of gene seed, a fleet refuge, a relic tomb, a recruitment pool, or a loyal memory. The fallen chapters were not to become warnings beloved by future zealots. They were not to become tragic names whispered by rebellious officers. They were not to become martyrs in the hidden chapels of worlds that had once heard the golden black giant speak. They were to become absence. The homeworlds were ruined systematically. Fortress monasteries were cracked open by bombardment, siege drills,
tectonic charges, and the patient malice of demolition adepts. Gatehouses that had survived Xenos invasions and civil wars were split apart stone by stone. Reclusium halls were stripped of skulls, Crozius heads, oath tablets, and funeral icons, then washed with flame. Tombs of ancient warriors were opened. Sarcophagi were scanned, logged, judged, and destroyed. Dreadnought remains were not honored. Their names were burned from adamantium plaques, their sarcophagus cores melted or cast into deep impact pits where molten rock closed over them. Relic vaults were emptied beneath armed watch. Swords that had slain tyrants were broken. Bolters carried through centuries of crusade were stripped of machine spirits by priests ordered not to weep. Banners preserved through impossible wars were soaked in promethium and burned without hymn. Armor suits were cut apart, so no plate could be reassembled into a shrine. Honor bells were dropped from towers and shattered. Chapter keeps became quarries of guilt, their stones hauled away to be ground into road fill or dumped into poisoned seas. Populations were culled according to contamination index. The old were killed because they remembered too much. The officers were killed because they had commanded under the false sigil. The priests were killed because their tongues had shaped the wrong prayers. The noble houses were killed because bloodlines carried loyalty deeper than doctrine. Entire serf clans were broken apart, their genealogies burned, their children sorted beneath the eyes of gene assessors, their useful bodies chained for transport, their dangerous ones sent to pits. Some worlds emptied without battle because their people had already seen what had happened to those who fought. Others rose in last devotional madness, screaming the forbidden title through streets already marked for orbital collapse. Moons were mined, oceans were poisoned, orbital plates were dropped. The Red Talons oversaw much of the industrial killing. They executed captured rebel tech marines in armory courtyards and forged shrines, not for treason of flesh alone, but for the deeper sin of permitting machine spirits to serve corrupted hands. They destroyed the manufactoria that had fed Traitoris Perdita war gear, even when those forges could have served loyal armies after reconsecration. Efficiency demanded denial. A forge that had learned one pattern of betrayal might remember it in some future hour. The Red Talons preferred certainty. They broke plasma foundries, shell plants, armor presses, reactor chapels, vehicle assembly basilicas, and war gear sanctums with cold method. Where Magi protested sacred loss, the Red Talons answered with execution protocols and bolter fire. The Flesh Eaters were unleashed upon the last pilgrim armies. Those armies had gathered in the wake of the false son's death, millions upon millions of mortals who refused silence. They carried icons made from broken palace stone. They wore scraps of condemned banners. They painted their faces in gold and black ash. They marched without strategy, without hope, without supply, singing until artillery tore the songs from their lungs. The pentarchy could have shelled them for days and been done. Instead, the Flesh Eaters were sent where the crowds were thickest and the fanaticism loudest. The result was not battle. It was collapse in red motion. Assault companies fell upon the pilgrim hosts in Thunderhawk shadow and dropped podfire. Chaplains drove them forward, voices cracking beneath the burden of restraint. But there were too many bodies, too much blood, too much screaming faith, and too much hunger pressing against the walls of gene-wrought discipline. The pilgrim armies broke beneath chain blades and bolt pistols. Their icons fell into mud. Their hymns became animal noise. Those who tried to flee were trampled by those still pressing forward for martyrdom. Those who reached the Flesh Eaters died trying to touch red armor, as if death by angel would carry them closer to the lie they adored. By the end, the plains were slick from horizon to horizon, and even the chaplains did not speak for a long time. The Death Eagles erased the roads by which history might escape. They hunted charts, witnesses, astropathic traces, courier ships, fleet logs, pilgrim songs, navigational memories, servo skull recordings, machine spirit residues, and half-mad refugees who had seen too much. Their kill teams entered archive vaults and left only ash. Their marksmen killed surviving heralds before they could reach Allied systems. Their fleet units destroyed beacon chains, collapsed hidden warp routes, and seeded dead corridors with false hazards so that future travelers would avoid the regions where the war had raged hottest. Astropaths, who had carried the false sermons, were examined, purged, or killed. Navigators whose third eyes had seen the throne system were sworn to silence, blinded, or placed inside sealed service where their bloodlines could be watched until extinction. Future historians would find contradictions, voids, impossible dates, missing fleets, casualty ledgers without campaign names, worlds marked compliant after their populations had vanished, and chapter references that dissolved into censor black. That was not failure. It was the Death Eagle's victory. The Charnel Guard returned to their stasis crypts with armor cracked and relics damaged. They did not celebrate. Their ships moved through the aftermath like mourning processions. In their holds, ancient warriors stood before open sarcophagus vaults, while serfs cleaned blood from plate that had last been woken for wars almost no one remembered. Some of their relic blades had been broken against rebel ancients. Some of their banners had burned in vault fires. Some of their veterans would return to stasis with wounds still sealed beneath adamantine and prayer. Their commanders entered reports that would be preserved only as sealed campaign fragments, then locked behind authority marks so severe that even their descendants might never read them. Of all the pentarchy, they seemed most burdened by what had been necessary. Of all the pentarchy, they spoke least of it. The Carcharodons received the cruelest assignments because cruelty without hesitation was the function terror required of them. They hunted escapees through dead systems, wreck belts, radiation shoals, hollow moons, and refugee convoys pretending innocence. They boarded ships filled with starving pilgrims and searched for one altered prayer among thousands. They entered orphan vaults, underhive fighting pits, scholar ruins, and noble blood cellars looking for hidden aspirant stock. Boys marked by the wrong hypno-hymns were taken, burned, chained, or vanished according to assessment. Serf elders who remembered the false Primarch's face were killed even when they had never carried a weapon. Painters were killed for making his image. Stonecutters were killed for carving it. Choir masters were killed for teaching the tune of his arrival. Midwives were killed in towns where newborns had been branded beneath the tongue. Sealed reliquaries were opened and burned. Some contained nothing but bones. Some contained armor scraps. Some contained gene seed vials hidden inside saint statues. Some contained memory caskets, each one holding the voice of a dead condemned captain, speaking his chapter name aloud so that it could never be fully erased. The Carcharodons burned them all. Where resistance remained, they did not preach. Where surrender was offered, they sorted. Where pleas were made, they classified. Where usefulness existed, they chained. Where memory persisted, they killed. The inquisitorial observer, who had once challenged their tithe methods, survived long enough to see the outer dark hunters complete their work. He watched a Carcharodon Reaper Prime order an entire settlement emptied because its children could recite the cadence of the false son's first sermon. He watched useful laborers branded and sent to the holds. He watched the old and the infirm moved into firing pits. He watched a chapel burned, while those inside screamed that they had only prayed as they had been taught. When the work was finished, he wrote a private memorandum calling the Carcharodons necessary monsters. The memorandum was confiscated. The observer's later fate was not recorded. At last, the High Lords of Terror gave the final order: purge the war from record. The official truth became silence. There could be no clean chronicle of what had happened in the segmentum Pacificus. No public admission that 11 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes had knelt before a figure claiming to be a Primarch. No sanctioned debate over whether the false son had been clone, demon work, lost weapon, madness, or something worse. No memorial for the worlds burned because they had believed too fervently in a lie shaped like salvation. No sermon warning mankind that the image of a returned sun had nearly shattered a segmentum. Such truth would wound the Imperium's mythology more deeply than any Xenos blade. The Emperor's angels could fall. The High Lords could be doubted. A Primarch's shadow could command worship. Those facts were intolerable. So the Imperium chose the oldest cure. It forgot with knives. The Carcharodons departed without honor rolls, medals, triumph arches, or gratitude. No Lord of Terror thanked them in person. No choir sang their name. No mortal crowd saw them pass and cheered. Their grey ships took on prisoners, salvage, ammunition, stolen data, chained labor, and the useful remnants of dead worlds. Their holds were full. Their armories were replenished. Their dead were recorded in hidden rites and fed to the chapter's own silence. The Shade Lord received no laurel for ending the false sun. He required none. Laurels were for warriors who belonged to history. The Carcharodons returned to the outer dark. Behind them, the last fires of the war guttered beneath censer seals. The pentarchy dispersed. The red talons carried their calculations onward. The Death Eagles vanished into roots they had already erased. The Flesh-Eaters left red ruin and whispered restraint behind them. The charnel guards sealed themselves into crypt sleep once more. The 11 condemned chapters passed out of sanctioned memory, leaving only black spaces in archives, distorted oaths in forbidden vaults, and the occasional nightmare in the mind of an old astropath who woke screaming a name he had never been allowed to know. Far beyond stable routes, where dead stars turned in silence and the maps of the Imperium frayed. Into superstition, a grey battle barge drifted beneath cold light. Its halls were quiet. Its serfs moved in chains. Its armories slept. Its warriors stood in the dark, white helms lowered, black lenses empty. In the hidden annal chamber, beneath shark-tooth icons and oath plates no outsider would ever read, the Shade Lord entered the final notation with his own hand. He did not write a victory. He did not write a confession. He wrote a sentence. 11 chapters were weighed. 11 chapters were devoured. The void remains hungry.